Hi there, I'm Eugene Sepulveda, one of the co-founders of the Culturati Summit.
And I'm Josh Jones-Dilworth, co-founder also. We're here. We're all here. It's very exciting.
And after quite a year, but which gave us the opportunity or the solution to bring in more managers and directors, as well as CEOs, CHROs, and executives. We've been looking for the opportunity, recognizing that culture isn't only from the top down, but also from the bottom up.
What's so cool about this year and what the virtual platform provides us is this ability to welcome folks from all over the country and all over the world. And so this is the most expansive Culturati Summit we've had yet. And we're so thankful that you're here.
And in getting to the 3 tracks that we have, we surveyed Culturati members, we queried CEOs and CHROs, and then we scoured the research. It appears to us the most pants on fire issues are around mental health and well-being, manager empowerment, and DE&I leadership.
We've also put a lot of time and effort into the virtual experience. There's the on the dot registration system where you can also do a lot of group and individual chatting, and we'll use that platform year round, as well as the AA experience, which is like walking into a room, walking into a building. That's where you'll see sessions. It's where you'll find each other. It's where you'll engage with vendors and sponsors.
And our team's expanded. Josh, you want to mention some of our team members this time?
Oh my gosh. So Janice Omedeki and Albert Swatner have joined us as co-chairs and have been running programming this year. They have done a fabulous job. Thank you. Thank you so much to Albert and Janice. Also in the steering committee this year are Matthew Duncan, Lori Knowlton, Dave Altunian, Ethan Burris, and Jamie Carpenter. And we also want to give a special shout out, as always, to Maria Brown-Spence, Rita Hendrickson, and Anne Hebert as well, who are also on our team and have been for a very long time.
And we're not just a summit any longer. We're really programming year round. We've got monthly webinars called Culturati Live. We've got the monthly magazine, which Josh and team are taking to a whole new level starting in May. And we've got the bi-weekly newsletter, and we can't wait to restart our quarterly events around the country. I have to give a great shout out to our top sponsors. So you'll see there's a huge number of sponsors. They'll be all over the hall and both on the dot and in the AA platform. But the top sponsors, Aduro, National Instruments, DLA Piper, Capital Factory, and AA Labs. Thank you for being with us. I want to turn it over to today's MC, Stephen Tomlinson.
Good morning. It's great to be with you at the 6th Culturati Summit for these important conversations about corporate culture. We've got some really experienced and wise guests to engage in conversation, but the real wealth of this summit is your experience, your curiosity. So we want to encourage you, as you hear from the experts and practitioners that we've brought together for this conversation, we want to encourage you to let us know what you're thinking. Share your questions, share your observations, anything we need to be talking more about, or questions about how to apply this stuff in practice. We want you to be engaging us on Twitter using the hashtag Culturati2021, or use the chat function in Culturati House, where you entered the summit this morning. Also, you can post questions or observations on the community bulletin board, which in the phygital world that we're meeting in is going to be over on the wall by the bar. So Twitter, the bulletin board, and the chat function in Culturati House. We're going to be monitoring all of this so that we can bring all of our ideas and questions together to make the richest possible conversation. Our first conversation this morning is with mine and Eugene's dear friend, Arianna Huffington, who engages the world with broad curiosity and wholeheartedly. Arianna is the founder of the Huffington Post and currently serves as the CEO of Thrive Global. She's written more than a dozen books, including her most recent, Your Turn to Thrive, which is available in the Culturati bookstore. We are going to be talking with her about mental health and well-being at work. So as you listen to this conversation, post your questions on Twitter or the bulletin board or in chat, and share your observations, and we're going to weave them all together into the conversation that you came for. Arianna, it is so good to see you.
And you too, Stephen. I wish we were all together, but at least we're together virtually.
And soon we hope. And we really thank you for making the time to be with us today for this important conversation. I want to start by asking, what has the last year been like for you?
So normally, Stephen, I live in New York. Our office is in Soho. My home is around the corner from the office. But when the pandemic hit, I moved out to Los Angeles together with my two daughters, Christina and Isabella, Christina's then fiancé, now husband, Paul, and my sister, Agape. And we've lived in this home where I still am, in our home in LA, where I brought up my girls. And I'm now ready to go back to New York. This year has, like for all of us, been a year of incredible challenges, huge adjustments, but also a year of amazing time with my beloved family, and of amazing growth for Thrive, because the things we're working on in our company around stress, burnout, mental resilience have become very central for every company.
Yes. And I'm wondering how, you're a person with a big heart and broad interests, of all the things that you could focus on, why did you choose mental health at work as your side of work right now?
Well, it all started for me in 2007, 2 years into building the Huffington Post, when I collapsed from exhaustion, burnout, sleep deprivation, broke my cheekbone on the way down. And that was the beginning of my realizing that what I was suffering from, which was diagnosed as burnout, was actually a global epidemic that tens of millions of people were suffering from. So I started covering these issues of how can we live our best life at the Huffington Post. And by 2016, I decided that I wanted not just to raise awareness, which I could have continued doing through a media company, but to help people move from awareness to action, from knowing what to do to actually doing it. And that required a very different company that could build a product, a platform, an app, that could bring real experiences to people to help them change behaviors and adopt healthier habits. And that's why I left the Huffington Post and founded Thrive Global to end the stress and burnout epidemic. And that requires focusing on mental health, as you mentioned, mental resilience, well-being in general, community, and everything else that has been so dominant in our conversations in the last year.
Yes. You know, as you talk to companies about this right now, where are you seeing the greatest urgency, the place where companies are experiencing the pinch of this, the pain of this, the most urgently and intensely?
Both when it comes to mental health, we've had huge increases in depression and anxiety, and the mental health crisis was already with us pre-pandemic, but also in productivity, because although people were working longer hours, the stress and the anxiety has made people less productive. In fact, there is some great research out of Yale that shows that when we are stressed, our prefrontal brain part deteriorates and we're less able to focus. That's why we've seen the skyrocketing increases in Google searches for how do I get my brain to focus. So for all these reasons, these questions of well-being, mental health have become central for the C-suite and boards, not just the HR departments, because they've become really essential for business metrics. And I love the fact that your focus here is on culture, because that's really what's changing. Companies are realizing that in order to improve the well-being and productivity of their employees, they need to improve the whole culture. This is ultimately about cultural transformation and not just giving another app or another product to their employees.
So you mentioned metrics, and I know that, for a lot of Culturati folks that are in these conversations, often in the C-suite about culture, perhaps about burnout, mental health, resilience, that having some sort of metrics to point to can make the difference when it comes to decisions that companies are making, because money, of course, is always a metric. And I'm wondering, as you're studying this, what kind of metrics are you all finding persuasive in this conversation?
So recruitment and attrition is a key metric. Productivity is a key metric, and a lot of companies now are acknowledging the productivity paradox, as we call it. We used to believe wrongly that in order to be productive, we had to power through exhaustion. We had to be connected 24/7. We now know from science, from athletes, that the opposite is the true. I think Tom Brady was a great example. He talked a lot about his sleep, about how he prioritizes his recovery as well as his training, and he was able to win a Super Bowl at 43. Also, interestingly enough, diversity and inclusion, which have been big themes of this year, are also increasingly being connected to well-being and business outcomes. So that's really what has been transformational, that all these issues are no longer just tucked away in the benefits department. They are part of C-suite and board conversations as essential for business success. And we've even had, for the first time in years, the SEC have a new reporting requirement around what you are doing for your employees in terms of attraction, retention, etc., while before the only reporting requirement was how many people do you employ.
Yes. So if, in fact, we can follow the numbers and see that making sure that our employees are not working out of exhaustion, but rather out of the refreshed and creative, engaged parts of their brain, and we can track that to what they're able to accomplish, we can tie that to recruitment and attrition, things that matter for companies, then the obvious next step is, where are the high return investments that companies can be making right now that actually move the needle with respect to mental health, wellness, and resilience? What are you seeing companies doing that are making a difference, and that are things that more of us should be trying?
So what we are seeing, and that's a great question, and that's why we are focusing on this, is a three-pronged strategy. One is to realize that behavior change will only be effective if you break it down into what at Thrive we call micro steps. A lot of behavior change attempts in the past have been huge, daunting, New Year resolutions that people tended to abandon by the second or third week in January. So we've broken that down to what we call micro steps, too small to fail. And I will give you some examples in a minute, Stephen. The other is to be able to engage people's hearts as well as their minds, to be able to inspire and motivate. And in order to do that, we need storytelling. We need cultural permission also from the top. And we need to be motivated and inspired by the stories of leaders in the company, peers, as well as cultural leaders outside the company. So that's where the third element comes in, which is close to the emphasis in this conversation, which is culture and community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The reason we don't have a consumer product, we only have a SaaS enterprise product, is because we believe that when you launch something to a company, then you can have the support of the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As opposed to just being an individual who downloads an app, and the churn, even of the most successful behavior change apps, is enormous.
Yes.
But if you do it within the context of the community within the company, it is so much more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And it really can lead to the cultural shifts that companies are looking for.
So I'm intrigued by this idea of micro steps, because that certainly sounds manageable, and that idea is in the air now with BJ Fogg's tiny habits and atomic habits. We're sort of being trained that small starts not only create momentum, but they also work as experiments to help us discover what's needed for thriving. And I'm wondering what kinds of micro steps you're seeing companies implement at work that you all are tying to the kind of difference that companies are looking for.
So, Stephen, we have hundreds of micro steps at Thrive. In fact, we have a book coming out this month on micro steps. And it's endorsed by BJ Fogg, whom I love and whose work on Tiny Habits has been instrumental for our work. And I want to share with you my three favorites.
Cool.
Which basically are about how to begin and end your day, and 60-second resets during the day. So I profoundly believe, and we have tons of data to prove it, and I've written a whole book, The Sleep Revolution, also to prove it, that a good day begins the night before. So being able to get the sleep you need to be fully recharged when you wake up in the morning is key. We all know how we feel on the days when, for whatever reason, we didn't get a full night's sleep, and we drag ourselves through our to-do list, and we can still get stuff done, but we don't have the creativity, the joy, the empathy that we can have otherwise. So my favorite micro step is to declare an end to your working day at some point before you go to sleep. Mm-hmm. Because really nobody has a real end to their working day. We have to declare it. Mm-hmm. And to mark that end to your working day by turning off your phone and charging it outside your bedroom. Now, that may seem incredibly hard for you. It's incredibly hard for 72% of the world that sleeps with their phones either on their nightstand or curled up with them. So start with one day. Start with one night. You remember, never allow a micro step to be too big for you. Break it down into steps that seem doable.
Right.
So for me, putting my phone away at night is key, because what happens, Stephen, is that very often we wake up in the middle of the night. It's hard to go back to sleep, especially during this incredible year. We even have a new term, coronasomnia. Mm. And we are tempted to go to our phone, which immediately even further disturbs our sleep. My micro step for starting in the morning is, again, to take 60 seconds before you go to your phone to focus on your breathing or your intention for the day. And my third favorite micro step is based on that same science of 60 seconds being enough to release the cortisol hormone from the body and course correct from stress. Mm-hmm. And you can do that multiple times during the day, between Zooms, after a piece of challenging news, anytime you feel stressed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. This to me sounds like, it sounds doable, it sounds promising, it also sounds creative, because you're going to be able to crowdsource micro steps from your own team at work, as well as the managers who know the team well and get their inspiration from their own work with the team. It sounds like the kind of program that is easy to get participation around.
I totally agree with you. We've had amazing results. And the reason is because it is based on science, but also because we tap into storytelling, ancient wisdom, and the things that connect our hearts and our emotions to what we're doing.
I'm wondering, Arianna, as you all, again, in your work with companies and your conversations with business leaders, can you point us to a company that you particularly admire for its commitment and creativity around this? Perhaps a company that you're seeing getting results from being particularly attentive to mental health and resilience.
Well, we've worked with some of the most creative and innovative companies like Accenture, Salesforce, Levi's, Walmart. Let me talk about Walmart, because what I love about it is not just that it is the biggest company dealing with both knowledge workers and frontline workers, but also because what it does can be done at such an enormous scale. So we have a 5-year contract with them to work with their associates, as they call their employees. And we have had amazing results using these micro steps, or what we call one better choice, to help people, let's say, who are working in the stores to lose weight, to improve their mental health, to improve their finances, to sleep more. And it's kind of amazing to see these results, which are huge results, come about through the small steps. Like if you're drinking 7 sodas and sugary sodas a day, which a lot of people do, don't say, I'm going to cut out all sugary sodas and drink water, because you're not going to. Or maybe you will for a couple of days, and then you'll go back to your old habits, and you will feel shame and guilt, and it will be harder to get back on the horse. So say, I'm going to drink half a sugary soda less and replace it with sparkling water with lemon. And that's the way we've had these amazing results. Cool. And the commitment from the companies, from the leadership, all the way to the store associates, and to bring together physical health and emotional health, as they call it. And that's something pretty game-changing.
I agree. And you're making me think that it's a conversation between the people on the front line, the members of your team on one hand, and the leaders of the company on the other hand. And I'm wondering how this gets negotiated. Is this something, what's the role of the business leader in fostering a culture of wellness, mental health, and resilience? And what's the role of the employee? Because in some respects, they have competing objectives. As an employer, I do want my people to be fully present and creative and attentive and when they're at work. But as an employee, I would like to have more time to rest. So how does it get worked out, these competing interests, for the sake of creating something bigger and better at work?
Well, actually, Stephen, the first thing is a mindset shift to realize that they're not competing objectives. That in fact, if your employee is exhausted, they're going to make mistakes. They're not going to be as productive. If they're dealing with customers, they are not going to be as considerate, because human beings cannot operate from their best when they are running on empty. So just to give you one specific example, we launched the 60-second reset Thrive calls into a Walmart call center. And just by feeding to the operators every few hours, thrive calls to ask them to focus on their breathing or get up and stretch or remember what they're grateful for, basically do something for themselves, the results have improved. The results in customer outcomes, result in employee stress, results in attrition. So that, but you're right. We've all grown up in a culture, in an overall culture that thought these were competing objectives.
Mm-hmm.
We need to now study the science and look at the data to realize they're not. And Stephen, you may wonder how come an entire culture believes something absolutely false. I traced it back to the first industrial revolution when we started revering machines. And the goal of machines is to minimize downtime.
Mm-hmm.
The role of software is to minimize downtime. But for the human operating system, downtime is not a bug, it's a feature.
Mm-hmm.
And when we realize that, we don't see any competing priorities.
Yes. What's really especially, provocative about the way you're talking is that you are advocating for practices at work that actually move us into a different part of our brain. And I'm wondering how these people that have moved to a more creative, richer, wholehearted part of their brain, they may actually want different things. What's going to happen to the culture of the company, or what kind of ideas are people going to start bringing with them to work that might actually change your company if you cultivate them for creativity instead of exhaustion or reactivity or grinding?
Actually, Stephen, that's one of the best outcomes, especially at a time when we are all recognizing that the world is going to keep changing at a faster and faster speed. So we no longer need a system within a company that is optimized for maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We need a system that's optimized for innovation, for diversity, for directness in communications. And to achieve all these things, we need people who are operating from their best.
Yes.
Who are connected to that place of wisdom and strength and resilience in them. And that's something that requires time to unplug, recharge, and return to work.
It seems to me, though, also, Arianna, that this is getting at a complaint that a lot of us have about our economic system, that the pressure is on companies for short-term results, which use up people like other resources and dump the waste, somewhere else. That we're really, what do you think? Is this the leading edge of forcing companies to think in a more patient, long-term way for the sake of keeping people productive?
Well, we've been talking a lot about stakeholder capitalism and making sure that it's not just shareholder interests that are paramount, but employees, communities, the environment. That conversation has become more and more central during this pandemic year. We've seen a lot more leaders engage in that conversation, recognize the connection between personal sustainability and environmental sustainability. So, this has been an incredibly tough year for millions and millions of people, a year of incredible losses of loved ones, financial losses, but it's also a catalyst that allows us to reimagine the world we want to build post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because the world we left behind is not sustainable. The world we left behind was a world where our work was breathless. We are all operating in a frenetic pace. diseases were skyrocketing. Look at diabetes and hypertension, which can fundamentally be affected if we reduce stress, improve how we sleep, what we eat, etc. So behaviors trump genes. But we were moving completely in the wrong direction. Same with the mental health crisis. So as a Stanford economist said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So I think it's really important not to waste this crisis, but to use it as a catalyst.
Do you have any advice for managers, employees, other business leaders that want to negotiate a healthier contract with their organizations? Say I'm a VP or a senior leader at a company talking to the board, and I want to make sure that people understand that I'm committed to bringing a fully engaged, healthy, rested, creative mind to the overwhelming responsibilities that the company is trusting me with. How do we, with this new awareness, how do we negotiate that sort of these sorts of experiments? Or is this something that we can just do quietly and people start to notice?
Well, it's actually happening from the CEO level. I mean, just to give you an example, we launched a mental health program at Accenture to all their 500,000 employees in 8 languages. It's a program we developed in partnership with Stanford based on their latest brain science. And it was launched, speaking of culture, by their CEO, Julie Sweet. She did a 2-minute video inviting everyone in the company to participate. And so that's really what's changing. In the past, this could have been a benefit launched by the benefits department, quietly put on the website, and they would pay the vendor on utilization. That system is changing. Companies are realizing that to see real results that affect both their employees and the business, they need that cultural transformation.
Yes.
And, this program had more engagement than any other non-mandatory program launched by Accenture. But that would not have happened if it had been launched in a traditional way. So internal marketing and then external marketing as well helps solidify these cultural changes.
I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about inclusion and belonging. What are you seeing as the connection between inclusion and belonging and mental health, resilience, and thriving at work?
Oh, it's huge. Obviously, there are targets that companies can establish for diversity and inclusion. But you also need people to be able to participate with their hearts in order to create a culture of belonging. And that's what we are finding is happening now. And I know from myself, Stephen, I'm sure you know from yourself, that when you're exhausted, you are your least empathetic self. And therefore, the two things, again, are interconnected. When I'm recharged, I'm less reactive, I'm more empathetic, I'm more able to, see the red flags ahead of me, avoid different icebergs, and be kind of a builder of this inclusive culture of belonging.
Who's doing that well right now that you're seeing?
Oh, we're seeing that a lot with Salesforce. We are powering what they call Camp Be Well, which is their well-being product. And diversity and inclusion are huge priorities for them, but also so is recharging. Pre-pandemic, Mark Benioff, their CEO, had established meditation rooms on every floor. Was encouraging everybody to take some time to go recharge in the middle of the day. In fact, I was just taping my podcast with him, and he was telling me how he often starts meetings closing his eyes for 60 seconds, again, back to that 60-second reset. And he said his team knows that he's not zoning out, he's not sleeping, he's just recharging and collecting his thoughts and being able to be fully present when the meeting starts. So that's, again, kind of cultural permission from the top.
Yes. So I'm hearing a lot of things that to me sound like not only promising practical steps, like 60-second resets, these micro habits that we can form around all kinds of healthy things at work, telling our stories to each other, or maybe even better, asking each other to hear their stories. When is this work meaningful to you? What is going on in your life that is distracting your attention right now? These things, stories, micro habits, 60-second resets, anything else that you want to make sure people are hearing that are sort of the basic building blocks of shifting your culture in the direction of mental health and resilience.
Absolutely. In fact, let me give you one of my favorite things that we've instituted, which is what we call the entry interview. You know, everybody does exit interviews. We start with an entry interview, which is part of everybody's onboarding at Thrive. And the first question we ask is, what is important to you outside of work? And how can we support you? And that is an amazing way for everybody to feel fully included, that they can bring their whole selves to work, and that they're going to find support. So, you know, someone may say it's very important to me to take my daughter to school in the morning. So there will be times maybe when she needs to be on a conference call, but it's good for her manager to know that that time is kind of sacred for her. Or whatever it is that is really important for an employee, because if they can bring their whole selves to work, they're going to be so much better at their job. And again, back to what you were saying, Stephen, there is no trade-off here.
Yes, yes. I want to end with this question, because I'm thinking about the trade-off in a different way right now. When I read the exciting things that you're doing, I'm asking myself at some level about how we approach burnout and how we approach mental health. On one side, there are practices and habits that we can build that build capacity so that we can keep up with demanding work. But on the other hand, there's the possibility that maybe we want work to demand a little less of us. How do we negotiate sort of the supply and demand of how much of ourselves we're giving to the competitive and project-based part of our lives versus the rest of our lives? Or do you see a way that we can actually merge these more beautifully?
That's a great question. I think there's a kind of philosophical answer that I used when I wrote my book, Thrive, which is that if we see our lives purely in terms of money and status, you know, these two metrics of success, we're never going to be really satisfied. So if we can include what I call the third metric of success, well-being, which is our health, which is paramount, wonder, you know, our capacity to be present and find joy and wonder in life, giving back, and wisdom, you know, being able to connect with our wisdom, that's a full life. So the first thing that we can do is define our lives in a fuller way than just how much money are we making and how high up the corporate ladder we are. But the other thing is that When we love our work, and every job has things we don't love, but when we basically love and believe in what we're doing, there will be times when we have to overextend ourselves, when we may have to work extra hard to meet a deadline, to ship a product. What we do at Thrive is after that, we ask people to take Thrive time. So it's not the overextending that's the problem. It's the not taking time to recharge after that. So if you've had to work over the weekend, take Monday, Tuesday off to recharge. And then you immediately come back recharged. And we have a lot of data that shows that when people, instead of recharging, power through, that's when they're more likely to get sick. That's when they're more likely to make mistakes or to show up and be more reactive, less collaborative, and all the things that we want to create a thriving culture.
Well, the most exciting bit of gospel in this story you're telling is that the data actually supports productivity, which would actually support the business bottom line. It's saying that if we can actually see human beings in a whole sense and invest in them in small, doable ways, we can actually have the more beautiful businesses that our hearts know is possible.
Absolutely. We are ending on a very optimistic note.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. It is always a pleasure to visit with you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I loved our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Arianna. It's great to see you again.
And you too.
We've really enjoyed the conversation, and our Culturati community has been sending us questions. They'd like to extend the discussion, and I want to start with this one. How do we start the conversation? Those of us who are all in and really believe the perspective that you're sharing, the priorities that you're invested in, how do we start this conversation with leaders, especially those who might be resistant?
Well, obviously, when you change an entire culture, as we are in the process of doing, some leaders will be trailblazers, and some will be lagging behind because it's hard to get rid of this perception that somehow, if you really care about your job, if you're hyperachieving and driven, then burnout is just the price you pay. What happened during the pandemic is that we've seen so much evidence of what burnout does to us mentally, physically. We now know so much more also about what it does in terms of our immunity. And we, as a result, have a much greater openness and much less resistance than before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I take it you're seeing that more senior leaders are more amenable to trying new things that previously they wouldn't have thought of as contributing to not only wellness, but work productivity.
Well, that's really the key. It's this redefining of productivity. Productivity was seen more almost like in mechanical industrial terms, like how many hours are you putting in, how much are you putting out. And now productivity is seen as much more integrated with the whole human, and how sustainable is it, and how much of it is real creativity and innovation, and how much of it is purely transactional and checking the boxes and going through your to-do list. And as there is, as we discussed, a greater and greater interest in diversity and inclusion and cultures of belonging, how are these affected and indeed sacrificed when we are running on empty?
Mm-hmm. I want to ask a really sort of super practical question right now. Imagine you're coaching me as a director who wants to go to their VP or senior leader to start this conversation. What advice would you give me about what to take to the conversation, how to prepare for it, and how to start it?
So I think this whole conversation has really two elements. One is what am I doing myself, independently of what the company is doing, and the other is what is the company expecting of me that's getting in the way of my being able to lead a sustainably productive life. So I would identify some things that make it hard for you to lead a sustainably productive life. It could be, are you getting calls in the middle of the night? Are you expected to work from the crack of dawn until midnight? Or what are the expectations? And are these expectations conducive to you doing your best work? So I would present it that way, that um, I would love to do my best work. I realistically, and all the science and data shows it, I'm not going to do my best work if I'm expected to answer texts at 1 in the morning, or if I'm expected to work around the clock. And there is so much science and
Yes.
data that can be shown, and that there is a lot of backup for that. But then it's
Yes.
also what are you doing independently of expectations at work? Because you may not have anything to do, after hours, whatever after hours are. Not that there is a specific definition now, but instead of taking the time to sleep or recharge, you are binge watching Netflix until 4 in the morning. So some of it is on us, some of it is on company expectations and processes.
Yes, I love this because really you are giving us a framework for negotiation. On one hand, as the employee or the leader of a team, you want me to go to my boss and say, I want to make sure you're getting the very best, the most out of us. So in a sense, it's up to us to teach our leaders, how to get the best of us. At the same time, we should expect the pushback and asking, what does the rest of your self-care look like? How are you as an employee making your own investments in wellness? And I think that that's an exciting conversation we hope is happening at work.
Right. And it's not, none of that means that we are not willing to go the extra mile. In any good job, there are days or weeks when you're shipping a product, delivering a presentation, whatever it is, when you may have to go that extra mile. You may have to work a weekend or pull an all night or whatever. The most important thing is what are you doing right after that? At Thrive, we call it Thrive time. So can you have time to recharge immediately after? Because actually that's the time when you are most likely to get sick, or to make mistakes because you're not operating at your best.
We have one of our participants who's asking, what opportunities do you see as we're making the transition back to more in-person working? People are moving from working at home to working in the office. What opportunities do you see in this transition for us to be establishing new habits or starting a new conversation about wellness?
Well, actually, I just wrote a piece which you should post for everybody to see, which is about the move to basically a hybrid work. It's unlikely that companies are going to demand that everybody's in the office. I mean, most companies we are working with are looking at a hybrid model. Some in the office, some working remote, and using the office more and more for collaboration, for teamwork. And what we have found, and what my piece is about, that where you work is only part of the story. The skills you bring to your job is the most important part. And so it's not just about hybrid workplaces, it's also about hybrid skills. And what I mean by that is that, we think of skills in terms of our professional skills. Are we a coder? Are we a professional manager, just our hardcore skills. But that's no longer
Yeah.
enough. What used to be called soft skills should really no longer be called soft skills. I'm calling them human skills of empathy, of the ability to collaborate, of creativity. These human skills are going to be more and more important in the post-pandemic world.
Mhm. We have a few moments left, and we have Your Turn to Thrive in the Culturati bookstore and are encouraging people to check it out. I wonder, how is the best way for our business leaders to keep up with the leading edge research that you all at Thrive Global are doing if we want to stay in this conversation and keep up with the news?
Wonderful. Well, I have a newsletter where I write about these things. We can also give you, the way to subscribe. It's free. All our site, thriveglobal.com, and all our social media, Arianna Huff with 2F, LinkedIn, are devoted to this conversation. So if you just check me out on LinkedIn or subscribe to my newsletter, you will be able to stay up on the conversation. And we look forward to hearing from you and to also posting what you are all thinking.
Thank you for spending time with us today and for the important work you're doing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So with Arianna Huffington's challenge that mental health and wellness are hitting the bottom line right now, and especially with this transition back to work, there's an opportunity for us to make changes and build a culture that not only is more sustainable, but also more productive. We might well wonder, how do we take the first steps? What does this look like practically? So in our next conversation, we've got some chief people officers who are actually doing this on the ground now, focusing on the design and execution of programs that can make wellness and mental health real, sustainable, and productive for the companies they work for. Leading this conversation is Margot Downs, who is an advisor, a coach, and has also served as Chief Human Resources Officer at Stitch Fix, Starbucks, and Lululemon. While you are enjoying this conversation, please have Twitter handy. Use the hashtag 2021 to share impressions and questions that you want us to be discussing here on the set and with the broader Culturati community. Also, you can post your thoughts and ideas on the shared mural board that is in our Phygital world over by the bar on the back wall. And also use the chat function in Culturati House to share questions and observations. Your engagement helps us build the conversation that you came for. So let's take a listen as these chief people officers discuss how to build the cultures that are sustainable and productive.
Hi everybody, I'm Margot Downs. I've had the opportunity to work with 3 great companies, Starbucks, Lululemon, and Stitch Fix. These companies were focused each in their own way on creating great cultures where people can thrive. The connection between great companies and great cultures is no accident. As Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. To say the least, the last year has challenged everything we know, including the ways we work. Today, we'll be discussing how to build culture in the midst of these turbulent times with our panelists who are on the front lines of this issue. So let's go ahead and meet our panelists.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Barnes. I am a Chief People Officer here at GitLab. I've spent the last 20 years in human resources and people functions in high tech in Silicon Valley, and I'm happy to be here with everyone today.
Great. Wendy, why do you love what you do?
Oh, I love building teams. I love seeing team members be productive and the results and the products that they create, seeing business success, that gives me great joy, and enabling people to develop their career and grow. That is my passion.
Fantastic. So happy to have you, Wendy. Let's go over to Jackie. Jackie, why don't you give us a little intro?
Hi, and thanks for having us. It's great to be here with all of you. I am the Chief People Officer for WPP, which is the largest marketing, media, and advertising agency in the world. We're over 100 countries and over 100,000 people, and responsible for 1 in 5 impressions that are created. So it's an enormous honor to be the people lead for this organization. My role before that, though, was the Chief People Officer for Walmart, also a great company, one where I learned so much. And I spent the first 25 years of my career with another great company, Accenture, which was the best classroom to learn all about human capital and what it means for people to thrive.
Fantastic. And Jackie, why do you love what you do?
Well, I feel like I'm going to take Wendy's answer. I mean, we might all have the same answer because I think that's what draws us to this profession. But WPP, as I said, is responsible for so many great impressions, and the people that are attracted to that work, the high energy, high creative, is the connection between technology and creative. And I love that space and what we do for our clients. But what I love about my job is that I get to foster the environment and the culture that has people attracted to this industry, to this company, so that they can do their best work and be the amazing creatives that they are.
That's wonderful. Thanks for joining us today, Jackie. We're so happy to have you. Let's head over to Jig, last but not least.
All right. Thank you, Margot. So hi, everyone. I'm Jignasha Grooms, and I'm CHRO for Epicor Software based out of Austin, Texas. We are an ERP company, primarily SaaS, and we are the essential partner to essential businesses. You've probably heard of many of our customers, from Ace Hardware to the Chicago Bulls to the Hyatt Hotels. And I'm delighted to be here because I've been in the tech industry for a little over 21 years and in HR for the last 16 years. Before Epicor, I was at Cisco for almost 9 years. And Margot, I loved what you said about culture eating strategy for lunch, because I think that is 100% spot on.
That's great. And Jig, why do you love what you do?
So I'm going to echo what Jackie and Wendy said as well. But my favorite part about being the head of the people strategy is that I really do believe that employees are the key competitive differentiator. And it hasn't mattered what business I've been in, whether it's software or hardware or connectivity. The people really make the difference between a great customer experience and also great business results. And I've seen that proven over and over. So I love that we've gotten to a point where we can really quantify the value of HR and people.
That's great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jig. We're really happy to have you. All right, are you ready? Let's dive in with some meaty questions to talk about today. So let's start with one about the pandemic. How did the pandemic impact your employees? And what are the top areas of your concern?
I'll jump in there, Margot. GitLab, we believe we're the largest organization all remote before the pandemic hit. So we were a little bit different and unique in that our team members were already working remote and were already distributed, but they now were working from home with their partners or their spouses or their housemates and their children and the dogs, and everyone was in their space. And so that became a big shift for us. And we really focused on our team members' physical and mental health. And physical, of making sure that they knew the protocol for the country that they lived in, or the general guidance that we were getting about COVID, sharing that, disseminating that information. And then things such as mental health, like how are we checking in with them? How are we making sure that they're okay? We created a mental health checklist that I encourage any of you to go look at. GetLab.com, search our handbook. We're very transparent, and you can find that mental health checklist there. And then we looked at our children, our team members' children. How were they doing in this? And how could we give a little bit of relief to our employees and team members to give them a break? And we created these juice box chats for the elementary kids and younger. And they were able to connect with other children across the globe. We're in 66 countries. So what an enriching environment to be on Zoom and learn from someone that was in a different country about their culture. So those were a couple of things that we did to quickly try to address this concern with the pandemic hitting us.
Wow, those are so thorough and well-rounded, especially when you think about children and how children have been impacted and parents. So kudos to you for really taking that on. Let's go over to Jackie. I think your organization, very different than GitLab. So tell us a little bit about how the pandemic impacted your employees and what were the top concerns.
Yeah, we were a very in-office culture, and we, didn't ever think that we could have done what we did, which was to go remote for 100,000 people in basically a 24-hour period. But we had the lessons learned because our China colleagues were impacted by the pandemic before most of the rest of the world. And we learned to be people first as our number one mantra. So what are the health and safety, just like you, Wendy, said, for our people, their physical safety and then their mental well-being. And one of the things I remember deeply when that March 14th happened, and this is a little bit about me. My husband's a retired Secret Service agent, and he saw me with like my hair on fire and running around trying to figure out how to help 100,000 people and their leaders go remote. And he's like, Jackie, you can't work this way for forever. And we don't know how long this is going to go on. And he was very right. So what we did was quickly organize into what were we doing in crisis? What were we doing to stabilize the organization? And then what were we going to do to start to talk about the future? Because we didn't know how long, and we needed our people to not all be working in crisis. And how did you deploy a team to manage crisis? Because that was very real. Rolling out things like employee assistance programs, making sure that, the health and safety was all taken care of so that we could focus then on what is the mental well-being, and then how are we serving clients? Because that, is our business, but also they needed us more than ever at the time. And it was the way we got through the beginning and then realized this is not ending. So how will we continue? And then I would add that not just the health pandemic, but in May and June, when George Floyd was murdered and many other senseless murders, we had what we call a second pandemic. And how are we going to mobilize again to take care of our people, create safety, and change our culture so that we were addressing the very point of that second pandemic, that we needed to be a better DE&I company, and why that mattered even more for a creative company that was serving clients and creating these impressions. So I could go on and on about the lessons that we learned through that and how we continue to, evolve our culture to be better. But I think it's both of those things that really uniquely impacted all of our companies and our lives that have shaped who we are today and how I think we'll be different in the future.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing out the events that occurred with George Floyd and many of the senseless murders. That was definitely another factor that impacted the world, people personally, and the workplace. I'm curious, what were some of the reactions from your employees with the DE&I focus that you did?
In June, there was a call to action written by over 1,200 Black advertising executives that were not just WPP, but across the industry, that listed exactly that, a call to action. And our CEO quickly recognized that was a good call to action. So we signed up publicly to do what was stated there. And it included reviewing your HR processes top to bottom. So what were the policies that were in the way that were causing bias to happen, and making those data points known to our people, like publishing our data. There was a number of activities that we're still executing on that list. But the second thing we did was say we would use the power of our voice. And I know I've made the point that we do have a strong voice and the ability to have great influence in how we create ads or impressions. And it was to create a committee and a review that people could raise their hand and say, I'm not proud of the work, or I want to be proud of the work, and be able to say, stop that work, or raise it up and see change that way with our clients. And our clients have really, I think, stood and appreciated our conviction on that. And then the third thing as part of that commitment was to have a $30 million over 3 years investment in training education, charitable organizations that we're going to serve, to solve for this racial injustice that is not just in the United States, but around the world. And I've been really proud of us recognizing where we're not perfect and how to continue to get better and watch us evolve every quarter. And we report to the board. We hold now our leaders accountable in their pay, and it will be a long road, but I am seeing change now, and that makes me proud, but certainly not proud enough to say that we're done.
Jackie, thank you for sharing that. So comprehensive. And I just love the taking responsibility for all the impressions that you have in the world. It's just so powerful. Thank you so much. Jig, is there anything you wanted to add about ensuring the well-being of your people in your organization?
Yes, well, I have to say, just listening to Wendy and Jackie makes me proud to be a part of this profession, right? Because I think if we lead with our people at the center of our business value proposition, it immediately makes a big difference. So very similar story to Jackie in that we had to get over 99% of our population virtual within a week. And thankfully, because of our China colleagues, we saw a little bit of it coming. I think one of the things that was unique to our industry that may be a little bit different than what Wendy and Jackie experienced is we really had to figure out how to drive cost savings and business continuity because everything just deteriorated. The business, all of our annual operations planning, the forecasting we had done. And one of the things I'm proudest of is that we as a leadership team came together and said, what can we do to have minimal impact on our employees from a benefits and a compensation perspective so that they feel well taken care of during a time of great uncertainty. And we actually engaged our employees as part of that process. So instead of immediately going to layoffs and furloughs, we talked to our employees about maybe doing a 4-day work week and everybody taking a 20% pay cut and led by example with the C-suite starting first. And it made a huge difference, not because the employees felt like they were part of the process, but because they also felt like we were willing to walk the talk. And I think that, Jackie, also goes into the DE&I piece. And really, when you talk about fairness and equity and inclusivity, I know that that's very important to me as a woman of color. And I know it was very important to all of our employees to feel like they were part of the solution and not just that one was forced on them. The one other thing, Margot, that I would add is we always had wellness as a key priority for HR, but we moved it way to the top. Mm-hmm. So it went from being one of our priorities to the very top one. And we led every communication from any member of the executive team with your health, safety, and wellness is our top priority. And we just did fun things, quick videos that we would share with our employees, encouraging them to keep balance where they could, depending on country laws, to your point, Jackie, because some of our employees were in complete lockdown, whereas others of us could at least, just experience some fresh air. But we did some fun challenges like 40 million steps in 41 days and went to all the different locations we have. So I think engaging your employees to be part of the solution really makes a big difference during unprecedented times. And it paid off. We had one of our best business years we've ever had with the best July numbers we've ever had in our 40-year history.
That's fantastic. What was the impact on employee retention, Jig, during that period?
It was wonderful, Margot. So I, much like all my peers, constantly am looking at attrition benchmarking. And our attrition numbers were some of the best we've seen in years. And we're in highly competitive markets: Monterrey, Mexico, Bangalore, India, Bracknell, UK, Austin, Texas. So we actually had great retention of employees. And in addition to just attrition going down, we had a lot of employees post on Glassdoor how much they appreciated the focus on them. And the best part is, and I fundamentally believe that when you put your employees at the center of your business value proposition, they reflect it forward to your customers. And because of that, many of our customers had their best year they've ever had as well. So it was a beautiful virtuous cycle.
I love it, Jig. And I've always believed that like whatever is internal is external, especially today. And I think you're showing us the power of that. Okay, let's dig in a little bit, taking another turn. So one of the things I know I've heard from people that I am working with is just concerns about how strong the culture can stay when when many things are virtual and people feel like the culture is being tested. So how did you feel that your cultures were tested, and what areas were exposed that may not have been exposed before? Jig, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give a bit more of a global perspective. So, we worked really hard the last 4 years around having a one Epicor culture. And so what worked for us, Margot, was really driving engagement and alignment through communication. But what didn't work is in many parts of the world, our employees had to go back to their native places. If I take an example like Bangalore, India, where you have software engineers, and I see Wendy nodding her head, so I know she understands this, but many of them live in what we call PGs, paying guests, right? Where you're renting a room. So something like COVID shut all of that down.
Wow.
And so we had, about 25% of our workforce that had to go home, back to their native places. And so the biggest, I would say, challenge for us was really getting them set up to be productive wherever they went. Because if we couldn't do that, then the engagement wasn't there. And when they weren't engaged, then the productivity would suffer, then the performance would suffer. And we know this cycle as well, right? So there's the good virtuous cycles, and then there's the downward cycle. So I would say that was our biggest challenge, and it continues to be, because the lockdowns are still in effect in lots of parts of the world. And we're waiting, we're taking a wait and see approach and doing our best to keep all of our employees engaged, creating a timeline with which they can come back. And we put into place a preparedness plan, because I want employees, when they come back, to feel comfortable and safe returning to the office or returning to our core locations, even if they decide to work virtually for a while.
That's significant. I think we could probably spend the whole time talking about bringing people back into the office or keeping people virtually. That's a whole other topic, which I think is really fascinating. But thanks for sharing that and giving us a little insight into your culture and how it has impacted your employees. Who else wants to jump in and talk a little bit about how the last year has really tested the culture?
I'm happy to jump in too. I think about, where has it not tested us? It's been in every part of what your values are never more tested than in a time like this, and how you think about your people at the heart and how you treat your clients. And one of the things that came to mind, and I'd say we learned as a result of the pandemic about our culture, was, like so many companies, we were going to cancel our intern program. And I felt really strongly, our CEO felt really strongly, that that's such an early career part of the talent pipeline for us. People would never forget or forgive us for having done that. And while there's economics to building an intern program, we pivoted to an all online one, like a lot of companies. And we had 300 interns scheduled to show up in our offices in the United States. And I hope that the 300 were going to sign up and do the online version. Instead, we had almost 1,000 people sign up to join us, and it wasn't paid, it was just experience. So that just shined a light on how much learning people were thirsty for. And when we built it out, it was 10 weeks of programming, and our clients wanted to be a part of it. And we had academics, and it was just became a really enjoyable experience for the participants and the faculty. And when we reviewed our results, we had over 71% of the participants were women, and over 50% of the participants were people of color. So it tested us in a way, but like I said, we learned that if we opened up our minds and we created an opportunity that we maybe wouldn't have thought of if the pandemic hadn't hit, of just what that could do for the pipeline of talent and leaders for the company. So now it's become a part of us, and it's been something our clients are excited about again. So I'm an optimist, so I have to see the half full on this one, and think that's the type of learnings we all probably have that are going to go with us and test us, but we'll be stronger.
Well, one of the things I love, I've thought about this a lot, is, constraints make creativity. And, we had a lot of constraints in the last year with being virtual, but it has allowed access to so many more people. I mean, I know even from the smallest things of being able to take certain classes that were not accessible. I took a class with Second City in Chicago that was an improv class, and I would never have been able to do that class being based in San Francisco. So I think that I love that you guys leaned into something that could really have been just a constraint in terms of moving forward, and really, it really blossomed into something great. So thanks for sharing that. So one of the other ideas I have, I'm just going to toss out to this group, is that I think that sometimes I've heard people say, oh, we're having culture issues because of the pandemic or because of the other things that occurred, with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. But my hypothesis is that some of those things were there already, and that this just exposed those issues in the culture. Did any of you see something like that in your own organizations that was already there but really got exposed?
So Margot, I'll jump in on this one. So absolutely, I think you're spot on about that. And I think, Jackie, I want to pick up on a thread that, you just brought up. I do think that there were a lot of positives from what happened. And I think it really allowed us to pilot the future of work, but it also allowed us, Margot, to have some crucial conversations that were lacking in the workplace, right? So we have more than half of our employees outside the US. People always say, well, then that doesn't apply to us because it doesn't apply everywhere in the world. I actually think that conversations around DE&I are relevant everywhere in the world. And I think the fact that leadership was willing to have the discussions, and we didn't have to take a public stand because we're a B2C company, right? We provide software to companies, but the fact that leadership was willing to have a conversation about it and talk about how we want to create a environment where employees feel respected and valued, I think that made a big difference and it opened the door. And I would tell you, for me, it was wonderfully eye-opening, much like what Jackie said, because I had employees call me directly to talk about some of those situations. And what was really interesting to me is that all of the employees that called me about Black Lives Matter were actually white and surprisingly white women. So I loved that people were open to the conversation regardless of their gender or ethnicity. I think we're facing the new version of that right now with what's going on in the US. And I think we have a lot of that going on all around the world. And I think International Women's Day and important significant milestones where you can pick up the thread of that conversation have really come to light because of COVID, because all of us went online so much. And because in a way, I think it gave us all, in a wonderful way, a forum to be really authentic in the conversation. So it's definitely been a topic of conversation for us everywhere from candidate pipelining. Like we're actually now using AI to take unconscious bias out of the candidate pipelining process. Because why not? Why wouldn't you do something like that that drives innovation, efficiency, and takes out unconscious bias? We're weaving that into our manager training to make sure that they understand what those biases are. And we all have them. I have mine 100%, right? So I think those kinds of conversations kept being brushed aside before. And I think a lot of what's happened in the last 12 to 14 months has pushed us to the forefront of that. And I'm delighted by it as someone who wants to see that fairness and equity. I think it's a really important one.
That's great.
I would add to that too, if you don't mind. We talk a lot about future of work as professionals in HR, but also in our companies. And what you just said really brought to life how it's pivoted for us here at WPP, where we did a whole study when I was at Walmart, which was great, around these are the skills of the future. This is what you need, digital growth mindset, data-driven decision-making, all these things that make really good sense. And empathy was always on the list. But now it's empathy to compassion, because think about the way that our people have to lead, the way that all of you guys are leading. It's really a different way of thinking about empathy beyond just that I can appreciate how someone's feeling, but I have compassion for how my team is feeling. And I think as leaders, that is the future of work. It's going to be inclusion. And how do you bring a team together, whether you're virtual or otherwise? And that to me will be the successful leader, the one who could be inclusive with compassion.
That's so great. Let's dig a little bit more on leadership. So what have your leadership teams done specifically to support your employees throughout all of these experiences and occurrences? Let's hear from Wendy. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So one thing we designed as a team pretty quickly was Friends and Family Day. We saw productivity go up, and we were really concerned that our team members were not taking the time to have the breaks and that burnout was going to start coming in. So we introduced Friends and Family Day. We've just had our 9th one on Friday. So they happen about every month or so. And it's a day where we completely shut down. including leadership, because if leadership is online, you know, everyone else is going to follow. So we shut down, and it gives everyone a moment to take a breath, to get out into nature, to have some space, to do whatever they need to do. But we've always had a culture of friends and family first, work second. And so we just brought that to the forefront and talked a lot more about it. And as an executive team, we exemplified that. So we gave examples. We showed, our CEO would show on our Slack channel that he was playing a video game saying, I'm taking a break. It's time for you to take one too. We created a Slack channel where we said, talk and walk. We're big on Zoom since we're all remote. So it always is usually cameras on, but we wanted people to get out and get exercise. So we created this talk and walk and take a little picture, a selfie as you're out walking and getting that fresh air. So those were a few things, but where I think it's so critical, and Jig talked about this too, is just leadership exemplifying the values and the culture. And then that allows all the team members and employees to feel, oh, I can do this. My leadership team is doing this and they want me to take a break, and they're talking about it constantly.
Yeah.
It's such a great point. And I think with being remote, I think that it's easy for people to lose that thread. And so being able to reinforce that and really have your leaders show it is just so important, especially during these times. Jackie, maybe you can wrap up this section and tell us a little bit more about what leadership has done to support your employees.
Sure. Our CEO has been really visible in this whole time, and I'm really proud of that. You know, when we were not, like I said, this online community, but he was the first to get online and open up in teams, 10,000 people and at a time, to start to just talk about how people were feeling. It wasn't a scripted agenda or anything like that. And I think that made it okay for everybody to feel safe. So we started to call them safe rooms, where you could go talk about whatever was on your mind around the world. And that continued and still does today. We just had another one today that was talking about inclusivity. So I think it starts at the top, and it gives permission and expectation that then everybody else is operating that way. And I think that that's also something that stays with us for good. And Mark was also very visibly the first leader out in our company to talk about mental wellness. Mm-hmm. And we've created a whole allyship program where our people are being trained to be allies, to recognize when people need help. And it's just another example where I think we'll continue to learn from our people about what they want and what they need, and our leaders are open to help.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And I think this is a good segue to talk a little bit about what's ahead, because I'm hearing from all of you on the panel that the learnings that came out and some of the issues that arose in your solutions are not going to go away when the pandemic goes away. They're really great learnings that will carry forward. So let's talk a little bit about what opportunities do you see as we move ahead to have a more authentic and thriving culture. Jig, can you tell us a little bit more about what you see for the future?
Yes, I'd love to. So, as I shared earlier, we have more of a hybrid model where our employees come in, some of them all 5 days because that's what they prefer, but most employees about 3 days a week. So I think really creating that environment where employees feel like they can drive their own balance from a work-life perspective continues to be something that we'll focus on. I love what Wendy and Jackie both said about leadership showing up by example. I think that's very important. So one of the things we've talked about as a leadership team is really making sure that we stay connected in small but significant ways. We like using those words, small but significant ways, with our employees. For instance, I also had an all hands this morning, Jackie, and we actually played a game during the all hands. And the winner of the game gets to have lunch with me whenever I get to their location or virtually, right? So I think small, important moments that matter are going to be something that we move forward with. And then the last thing I think we will move forward with that's going to be very important for our employees is creating workspaces that really honor people meeting their highest purpose, right? So we're never going to be a Google or an Apple, so we're not going to be able to provide campuses like that, but providing opportunities. For instance, we have regular meditation classes in our Bracknell, UK office. In our Bangalore office, the team often gets together on Saturday mornings for walks or jogs or just to spend time together. So making sure that we're creating opportunity for our employees to engage in a way that's meaningful for them will really matter. And I want to add this one last thing, because I heard both Wendy and Jackie bring this up, but we have a day we give employees for epic giving. And that could mean whatever you want it to. It can mean volunteering at a hospice, to spending time with a relative or a friend or a loved one. And we really encourage our employees to do that on their own terms, because I think it's important to give people that power to make those decisions themselves. So really creating a culture, not just of inclusivity, but also of empowerment, where employees feel like they don't have to check in and that their higher purpose can be met while still delivering great work.
So many wonderful things coming up. Higher purpose, compassion, inclusivity. I can't believe it, but we're coming to the end of our time together. So what I'd love for you to leave our audience with is just one nugget of advice. So this is going to be a lightning round that you would share with leaders who are trying to build and maintain an authentic, thriving culture. Jackie, let's start with you.
Sure. I have 3 things I would say in one sentence. So it's focus on growing yourself, focus on growing your team, and then focus on growing your business.
Fantastic. Let's head to Wendy. Lightning round number 2.
I would say keeping an even playing field as companies are deciding what hybrid's going to look like or how they're going to return, making sure that that employee experience is the same for everyone. We all know what it can feel like when you're remote and everyone's in a conference room. So now let's make sure it's even and have that equal playing field.
Great. Jig, wrap us up for the lightning round.
Yeah, I would say leading with compassion and kindness, and also leading by example, because when you build high trust amongst an employee base, the business results will follow.
Fantastic. Well, I want to wrap us up with just thanking all of you for the wisdom that you've shared. I think, I'm taking away so many ideas and just the threads. I think I mentioned this before, but I think there's really something in here about how you really all have maximized what could have been something that was detrimental in the pandemic and through the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd impact, and really turned it into something that's going to be a lasting change that really improves the culture and improves the engagement of your employees. And I love the ideas that you're bringing through about choice for employees and inclusivity and compassion, which are things I'd love to hear more of in the workplace. So thank you so much for sharing your learnings and helping us get a glimpse of what the bright future is ahead for us.
And thank you, Margot.
Thank you.
It's clear that one thing that's different about this year's summit is the context. Instead of being the folks who are trying to sort of push a boulder uphill against forces of tight focus on narrow notions of the bottom line, we're now in a world where the cards have been reshuffled by the pandemic, by George Floyd's story, by all the things that are happening right now that are unsettling the givens. And in this environment, not only is change possible, but priorities are shifting. I had a conversation with a sales leader the other day who said, if my folks will just show up and get on the phone, we're going to sell enough stuff. My goal as a sales leader is to make sure that the work that they are doing is making them better human beings, so that when we send them home from work, they're better parents, better friends, they're better members of their community. And I thought that was an astounding vision, and one that has become sharper for many of us in the last year. How much of our work has to be driven by motivations that basically boil down to fear, and how much of our work might actually be more fruitful, more sustainable, more creative if it's driven by higher level motivations like play, creativity, service, and just enjoying each other. As we think more about how to make the transformations in our culture that will change our businesses and change the world. It's good to hear from leaders that are wrestling with this on the front lines and at the ground level. In our next panel, Matthew Duncan, who's a member of the Culturati Steering Committee, is going to be talking with 3 innovators who have started companies that are focused on measuring and managing cultural change and finding those places where well-being actually goes to the bottom line, helping leaders invest with confidence in these changes and help execute them effectively. Let's listen in to the conversation that Matthew leads. If you will put your questions and Twitter on our mural board or in the Culturati House chat, we'll be able to weave them into the bigger discussion that's building as we're together today.
Welcome, Culturati community. In this session, we're going to talk to the experts on empowering workforces to be well and productive. After a year we just had with the pandemic, it's no small task to holistically address the well-being of your people. Hi, I'm Matthew Duncan. As a Culturati strategic advisor, my role in the culture movement is to be a catalyst at the intersection of human performance and technology. I've dedicated my work and energy to wellness, innovation, the employee experience, and most critically, the future of work. Today, I have the pleasure to be with some of the leading innovators in the industry who are bringing forth advancements in technology, behavioral science, and coaching to support and lift the physical and mental well-being of employees and the larger community that we live in. So welcome, panelists.
Thank you.
So let's go around and just do a quick introduction. Joshua Templeton from Maduro, you want to start with us?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. My name is Joshua Templeton. I head up growth for Aduro, and just a little bit of my background in our organization. Aduro, for context, is what's referred to as a human performance company, which is, simply put, it's when well-being and an individual's performance intersect. And that's where you really start to see that true flourishing that many of our clients love to see within their employees. What I also love about what we do is that we certainly interact and leverage our own technology each and every day. And I'd say through the pandemic, I have certainly taken advantage of coaching and development and how to be a better parent and how to navigate through all things pandemic. But it's also given me some really great tools and resources that I've been able to leverage with my clients and my own family and friends. So super excited for our time together today, and very much looking forward to it with both Jennifer and Brad and yourself, Matthew.
Great, welcome. Brad, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. My name is Brad. Last name is Landy Shannon, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Spring Health. And Spring Health is a mental health benefit, and we remove every barrier to mental health. As we all know, the last sort of year plus that we've all survived, our mental health has really taken a toll. So we have seen really incredible explosive growth, but our business model is really to deliver the right care at the right time. So we have clinically proven strategies for establishing care plans for people that are highly personalized. And that includes therapy, psychiatry, and also coaching and some other more subclinical solutions. And my background, just a little bit more about me, as I was running marketing at Culture Amp before this. I'd say for the past decade or so, I've been really focused on the workplace culture space. And I'm just really excited to be at Spring Health, where we are really living at the intersection of how mental health impacts our workplaces. So super excited to be here and to talk about this.
Great, welcome. That's a great applicable background. And Jennifer, will you share a little bit with us?
Hi, Jennifer Sargent. I am Bara's Chief Commercial Officer. Bara Whole Health, we are a leader of advanced primary care solutions, and really using primary care as a way for members and employees to access a system that helps them manage their whole care. We call it whole person care. So we take a biopsychosocial approach to how we make sure members, I love, Brad, what you said about getting the right care at the right time to support them both physically with social determinants of health as well as behavioral health.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think we span all aspects from well-being to mental health to care. So let's kick off the questions with talking a little bit about this crazy year we had with the pandemic and the fact that it's truly impacted people, right? We're definitely heading into a new direction as the COVID vaccine will be available to all eligible adults by around May 1, as we're hearing. And we're beginning to actually turn the corner onto this new hybrid workplace. So why do employers even need to care about wellness at this point? Jennifer, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd love to. It's a great and very relevant question. And I think as we look at journeys that employers have been on in the past, many employers have focused on the well-being of their population. But I think it's traditionally been around how do they make their employees well at work, right? How do they try to fit, life around work? And I think we can all agree that the past year has flipped things on its head, right? The lines between work and life have blurred. The way that we work has changed. The things that we've all been facing on a day-to-day basis have changed. And I think employers are starting to realize that now it's really around how do you fit work within your life? And employers need to start thinking about, from an employee retention and engagement perspective, how do they provide the support to their employees and now their families to really figure out how to make work a part of their life and be healthy and well and productive at the workplace. And yeah, I think over time we've always struggled to define like what's the ROI on wellness or well-being. And I think right now we can all agree it's just so apparent how important it is for us to have workers that can even show up and be productive, health, and happy. We really need to support them in this new flexible environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Josh, from your perspective, how are you seeing sort of organizations define wellness, especially as we move into this new work reality?
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, the comment you made at the end there, right, around, the world at home and the world at work have kind of collided together is I think, a great example of, we have such a different workforce now. And so when you think about, what employers are really asking of the partners that they're working with in the market, which ultimately provides the types of resources that are available to individual employees, right? Now we have situations where, if you're looking for counseling or therapy or any form of clinical support, 1 out of 10 counselors are taking new patients. And so, okay, I'm stressed or I'm anxious because I've got all my kids going to school next week. Well, maybe I want to talk to a different resource, or maybe I need some coaching or guidance. And so what happens is, as these organizations are trying to figure out, like, how do they provide the right type of resources, we're continuing to have change. And so what's happened is at an organizational level, we're seeing our clients really take a step back and look at well-being in a very different way for all the things we just talked about. Change, everything's now commingled in one. People are now navigating a new world of stress. People's lives have changed foundationally. And so what we're seeing is organizations are actually uncoupling, if you will, the idea of a traditional well-being program, and they're getting it away from directly tying it to a overarching benefits program and saying, we need to make this its own thing. This needs to be able to interact with our employees 365 days a year. We need to not only tie this to that beginning part of the year, but what about the summertime now? And how do we prepare people for that lull when they've been with their children or maybe themselves throughout the year, and now they have this lull in the year? And then how do we get them ready for the fall? And by the way, COVID-19 could potentially ebb and flow as we continue to ebb and flow. So what we're really seeing, Matthew, in your question is, we're seeing organizations look at wellness and well-being very, very differently. They're looking at it as, how do we engage and create ignite moments within our population so that they know that they've got the tools and the resources to actually navigate this. And then last but not least is, when you think about the culture part of it, is we spend a third of our lives working together. And so what better time to reprioritize how you think about your people than right now? So it's a little bit what we're seeing. And I think it kind of ties in nicely to what Jennifer and Brad started off with at the beginning of our time.
For sure. I mean, it's truly becoming this cultural imperative, and it's become a priority from the C-suite down. Well, one of the questions I often get asked, especially even in the recent sort of CHRO panel that we've had, was around measurement and monitoring. So how do we actually do, and have we gained enough knowledge to truly measure and monitor sort of the progress for well-being? Brad, you wanna take this one?
Yeah, sure. I also just want to segue from the conversation we were just having, because I do think that it's really important to acknowledge the fact that there are systems and there are things in place today that are not working for our organizations. Mm-hmm. And part of what I want to share is my own personal story, which is I moved from San Francisco with my husband and my 4-year-old in March or April, from San Francisco to Portland. And I was moving as, has some stress associated with it. And it was about 30 days after we moved that Oregon was hit with the wildfires. And my family was evacuated. I got the notice on my phone. The phone was beeping. I still have boxes we haven't unpacked. There's this moment that I was like dealing with a crisis, and I was high performing, productive, like leader of a team. And when I reached out to my HR leader, by the way, one of the most culture centric organizations today, Culture Amp, we sell the culture, the product. When I reached out to my HR person, I was sent to an EAP phone number. So I called this phone number to try to get therapy. And of course, I called 5 people. One of them called me back to tell me that they didn't have time for me. And the reason I think that story is so important is to highlight, like, thank goodness I had other tools. I had access to other means. I had friends who referred me. I was privileged enough to be able to afford private care. Like, not everyone is in that situation. And so I think the importance of this is it's gone from a conversation that people are having in the benefits room to the boardroom. And if you're not dealing with mental health and you're not thinking about holistically how your employees are doing and how you're supporting them, you are really missing the boat here. And I have never seen it more prioritized. And it's part of why I transitioned my career from just culture to this particular category, because I found that it was one of the most impactful things to helping to improve the culture, was giving people the ability to deal with their own individual challenges. So that was a little bit of a segue, but to answer your question about metrics and how are we measuring the success and the impact, I think one of the things that we do at Spring Health that is really, really powerful is we can give you data in aggregate. So looking at your employees, what percentage of them are dealing with depression, with ADHD, with PTSD, the most common challenges that people face? And then how does that change over time? So are the programs you're doing, is it getting people better? Do you see people in recovery? And so, like, really looking in aggregate, there's a lot of, platforms and tools, and thank goodness there's a lot of new companies that are spinning up every week. And I think that there is a lot more that we are able to measure and track. And as an HR leader or a senior leader in an organization, the access to that data is available if you have the right partner. And it is important to quantify this stuff so that you can see that those percentages are changing over time, and that the impact to your organization, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later, but also can be felt in engagement scores and other things that you can look at that could be tied to some of those mental health metrics.
That you mentioned one thing around just the systems that play into actually supporting the people. And so I want to segue a little bit into the questions we often hear from the Culturati community around, help me understand a systematic approach that really starts to drive towards a healthier, both physical and mental, healthier existence for our population. And Jennifer, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you think about that systematic approach and how you would share that with a senior executive.
Yeah, I love using the word system, because asking our employees and our members to navigate just the healthcare system alone, not even thinking about like their own lives, can be so complicated. And I think oftentimes employers can get themselves into trouble by offering so many great benefits without putting the system in place to help their employees navigate through those benefits and get to the right place at the right time. That's one of the reasons why we believe something like primary care at the center is such a great way to build a system around it, because you give the member one place to go with a care team that then can help them with the reason that they're coming in, and then get them connected into wherever else they need to go, right? So many of our clients will use other firms like Brad and Joshua's, and we can get the member in, help them with their problem, and then potentially navigate them out to an additional benefit or try to serve their needs within the system that we've built. And if we think about the stress around just navigating healthcare and even COVID itself, I'll share a little personal story as well. I had a baby last year during the pandemic. And so trying to navigate what that was going to be like, I thought 3 weeks before I might have COVID. And so I was trying to figure out, like, where do I get a test? And I'm trying to call in places. And I ended up, picking up the phone and calling internally into my organization, to my care team, and saying, please help me, because I don't need the added stress of this right now, right? And several other examples throughout that journey for me. It's just really about giving them a place to go to help them navigate and get the right care. So building a simple system is really important to think about.
Can I just, I think a real quick comment, Jennifer, and I think it's a really important one when you mentioned the physician, that primary care physician really at the center. When you think about it, one of the interesting things we've seen over this past year, and this is true, I mean, if you look at many different data points, for all intents and purposes, people haven't gone and seen their doctor in many instances for over a year now. People were scheduling annual physicals in, March and April and trying to get it on the books, and they weren't seeing their doctor until December, January, like literally right now. And then you think about what you said, which triggered this in my mind, which was, where do most people generally have that introductory conversation that they're stressed or there's anxiety or a number of different things they're thinking about? It's with their primary care physician. It's the first question they generally ask. Josh, tell me what's new with you. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's such a great call out, which is like, how do we help people get back to that place? How do we help them get to a place where it's almost like we're playing catch up right now. And Brad, I think I just wanted to say as well, like, that makes total sense. Like, you're in the same boat that everyone else is in. You're in this moment of stress and anxiety. You and your partner just moved. There were the wildfires in Oregon. You're playing catch up. So I just wanted to hover on that for a second, because I think it's such a great point, right? Which is, how do we help people get to the place where they can start identifying that they need support? And then to your comment, Jennifer, routing them in kind so they can get access to those resources.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that came out when we reached out to our community of culture leaders was, of all the people that they felt really needed support in the organization, were frontline and middle managers. There was this unnatural sort of evolution of new responsibility that they had to take on and were burdened with, going from just managing their teams and their outputs to now actually having to basically coach and care for these people. And they just didn't have the experience. And so we've gotten a lot of inquiries about, how do we support our middle managers in a new and sort of effective way? Who would like to address that?
I can take a part of it, which it's interesting, having moved from Culture has an engagement survey, and we measure the health of your culture, and so there's a way that you're checking in with your employees and you're getting a pulse, which is really important. But I think what this comes down to is like where the rubber meets the road is the relationship that managers and people have with their teams, the one-on-one relationship. And that one-on-one format is like you show up, you go through your projects or whatever. Any good manager has a regular one-on-one cadence. I think the thing that is really important to remember is that how are you spending that time? Like, what are you actually talking about, especially when things are going on in the way that they have been for the last 18 months, whether it's the pandemic or social unrest or the Capitol or, I mean, fill in the blank. Like, there's just been so much. And so I really, as a leader of other teams, is to make sure that you're using that time to provide space to have real conversations, not just about how's the project doing or how are things moving forward. So I think that's like one way to answer the question. I think the other, which is part of, why I feel like this business model that we have around mental health is so important, is like, we're all not equipped to deal with all the challenges. As great of a leader as I am and all the training that I've had, there are many, many, many times that I am out of my depth. Like someone who is dealing with depression or who has had a really, really rough time because someone has died in their family or postpartum, like these are real issues that we are not equipped to deal with. And so I think it's really important for people to know that there are tools and there are things that people can go to outside of the bounds of their role as a leader. And that's where I think there's just proliferation of all of these great companies, which I think is such a wonderful thing for our society at large, regardless of some will win and some won't. At the end of the day, it's a really important moment. And I'm really thrilled, for humanity, quite frankly, that we have more of these things. Because when my parents were growing up, like, you didn't talk about this stuff at work, like you definitely didn't. And so I think it's just to be aware, like get aware of what your company has as a leader. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're in HR or not. If you are facing things at your team, that are out of your depth, to really make sure you're leaning on HR to say, like, I need support here. And I want to say that because I think a lot of the people who are probably part of the Culturati community have their heart in the right place. Like, they really care about culture and they want to do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is to say, this isn't my zone. Like, you need to get other help, And I think that that's a really hard thing to come to terms with when you're a seasoned leader who cares about people. And there are many cases where that really is the case.
Brad, I really appreciated your comments and really the importance of making sure that as a part of your culture that you're really making it a foundation to make time and space to have the conversations. And that really starts from the top down. Right? I mean, the top leaders of an organization need to be asking those questions of their people, asking them if they're asking the questions, right? I mean, I feel like in the past year, I have gotten to know people at work on a deeper level, even though I haven't seen them in person. I'm not in the office with them. I'm not traveling with them. And I think it's because we've been forced to get personal part of the time because it comes, screaming into our virtual meetings and our kids are running into the room and so you start to see people and learn more about their personal life and open it up. But I think really just from the top down, making sure that you're setting this foundation that it's okay to have those conversations. At Vera, part of our foundation, the foundation of our culture is one of empathy, and really approaching all of the interactions that you have with empathy. And really thinking about what is that person facing, and Brad, to not make it about let's just start talking about the project. Let's talk about what's happening with you. I think that those are really great words. Thanks for sharing that.
One thing I would just real quick, Matthew, I was just going to add on is, what's interesting, if you think about it, we're doing something that has, in most instances, has never been done before. We're hiring and building teams, and we've never actually met these individuals. And so when you start to think about, building that authenticity, Brad, the comment you made a second ago about, when your parents were working, these were things that in most instances, we were in many instances trained to not talk about. So the real question is how are you equipping your people and your leaders to hire, onboard, work with, and drive amazing experiences? And as we all are doing this presentation and this session, and you're doing it virtually, the real questions are, Are you training your people to be successful? How are you doing that? Are you giving them the tools they need? So to your point, Brad, if they get to a place in their journey where they go, whoa, like this is more than what I know how to handle, right? That you're putting them in a place to be successful. So I think it's the comments you both made, I think are really important. And the real question is, right, is how are you training your managers and your leaders to not only navigate that, but to be able to handle it and do it in a really great way?
Are there some?
I just have one like quick tip, which could be very simple, but it has really changed, I think, the quality of the conversations. Is there's a line item in every one-on-one agenda that I have, which is rate your current like well-being state, like on a 1 to 5 scale. How are you? And why I like that, and we always talk about it, is stuff comes up there that I would never not know about. And so you're asking people to track their own well-being. You're also saying it's important enough for us to spend time on it and for me to know what's going on with you so that I can think about load balancing of projects and, what is the thing that I might be able to do to support you. So that's like a really small thing, but it can change the tone of the conversation in one-on-ones.
So I'd like to switch the conversation a little bit towards this concept of innovation, right? So we're really getting into some realities that is facing us in our work and life environments. As innovators, what new technologies or service advancements are you seeing out there that are going to change the personalization, that are going to help, sort of move to a more empathetic or sort of engaged set of members inside your organization? Who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to just share a little bit about what I think is happening in the more macro environment around artificial intelligence or machine learning. And I think one of the things, that hopefully we are all more aware of now than we were before 2020 is systemic racism and like what is actually built into the systems that we are all a part of. And so what I think is really important when you talk about care and healthcare is that there are biases that are built into a lot of our models, and we are not even aware of it. And part of that is because a lot of these models were built by white men. And I think it's really important to raise that point. And what I think can happen, and the power of AI and machine learning, is that it can point us to what those models are doing and where the inaccuracies lie. And so I think that we're at a time when technology can really start to point us back to our humanity if they're used and they're leveraged in the right way. Now, if we're blind to it and we pretend that machine learning also isn't built by humans, so there's bias built in it, then we're going to miss the opportunity. But I think what AI and machine learning do is they take in all the variables, more than our minds can possibly hold, and they help us make better decisions over time, whatever that decision is. For us and our technology, that decision is what's the best next step of care for you, based on where you're from, based on the issues that you've told us about. And so the great thing about that is that we can get better and better over time and less biased over time, because we're looking at all those variables which we just couldn't look at in the same way with the same level of complexity with individual humans evaluating those things. And now I think we have technology that can really work in our favor if you have conscious, aware people who are behind those systems. And I think we've really pointed to the need for those kinds of leaders at this particular juncture. So my hope is that those people are rising in the ranks, and we're part of a positive shift in that direction, given all the things we've had to face over the last several years, and for many people, lifetime.
Joshua or Jennifer?
Yeah, the one thing I would say that as you think about, everything we've been talking about today, right, which is support and having conversations and getting to the right people so that they can even give you the direction you need. When we think about what Aduro has been really focused on is not only the intervention, but how do we do it sooner? How do we do it before it's actually a dire situation? How do we how do we look at all of the information that we have access to, also listening in a really great way to each individual member, and then intersecting with them with the right solutions at the right time. And you talked about that at the very beginning, Brad, and Jennifer, you've mentioned it a few times as well. And so we've been really focused on not only building out continuing to build out a suite of services and solutions around, right, meeting people with an authentic experience, but it's also very much what we've talked about around there is still a stigma associated with mental health. I mean, if you think about, talk to, I think each one of us are in cities, and probably many people on this session are maybe potentially in cities where they can be a dash more progressive, or maybe they have access to more resources. But, certain parts of the United States and even globally, mental health is still, it's spoken about in hushed tones. And so how do you meet people with that authentic experience? And so we're talking about coaching and advocacy. So a lot of what we're doing is, focusing on bridging the gap between individuals and care, individuals and chronic conditions, and how do we intersect with them earlier versus waiting to a place where it's actually a dire situation. And then the only possible way to intersect with them is medically and with medication and drug. How can we help them before they get there? So I think those are, some of the areas we've been focused on, but I'd be very excited to hear what Jennifer and her team are working on as well.
Yeah, those are both such great comments. And I think related to that, it's really around how do we get access to care to people in a way that's meaningful to them. Instead of asking them to engage with us in the way that works for us, how does it work for them, right? And there's some simple examples. We pivoted really quickly last year to move a lot of our care virtually, as many organizations did, and are now thinking about, in the new world, how do we allow people to get access to care more quickly? Joshua, you brought up a great point. Like, before it's a problem, instead of having to wait a few days for an appointment, can they see someone virtually now? Can we get them connected to a behavioral health specialist today virtually versus having to schedule an appointment 3 weeks out? How do we use data to then better inform that process and make sure we're getting people to the right intervention at the right time? So it's really an exciting time that I think puts the member and the person first with what they're dealing with in their lives. And I think the comments that Brad and Joshua made are just so tie really nicely into that concept.
Yeah, that note of personalization and making it feel as the member, the patient, the employee really is getting what they need is really important. Well, I'm gonna leave us with the last question, just about some advice, right? As the Culturati community is putting together their playbooks and looking at sort of how they're going to plan into this new hybrid work world, give us your, key negative advice on what a leader should really think about when they're trying to establish this systematic approach to well-being and care. Brad, you want to go?
Sure. I think the first thing that came up for me in that question is, as a leader, be really clear about where you are taking a stand and what are you standing for. I think one thing, I know that many people who are in HR, sure, they have the responsibility and oftentimes they're looking at a lot of these solutions, but they're in service of the company. So regardless of what is next to your title, whether it's associate manager or VP or C-level, when it comes to the well-being and care of your team, think about what do you want to take a stand for and bring those ideas to your executive team. I think that at the end of the day, they're in service of the employees. And I think it's really important that leaders really use this time to be clear about what they have conviction on. What are the things that you're willing to fight for? And sometimes we can just coast. And I feel like if 2020 taught us anything when it comes to having more humanity at work, is just don't coast as a leader. There's just so many things that we all need and want. So that's a big one, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. Draw your line and know where you're going. Jennifer, what's your nugget of advice?
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind. I think really just putting your people first and approaching whatever you're building with a sense of authenticity and empathy about what your people are facing related to work in their life. And think about it as a system and make it simple for them to use, so they know exactly how to get help and how to navigate whatever it is they're facing.
Make it simple. Love it. Joshua.
You know, both comments, or both the individuals and their comments, I think are spot on. I would keep it simple to three things. Number one is, how are you listening in the best possible way? If you're listening, that means that they have the opportunity to tell you what they're thinking. And do you have the right tools to listen? Second piece is engage with them. How do you create thoughtful, authentic engagement with your teams, with your organization, and how are you setting that standard and that culture? And then last but not least is, how do you help them activate? 9 times out of 10, the first step is like, I know I want to conquer something, and I know that I have the tools and the resources to do it. If I walked away with this, those would be the 3 things I'd want to focus on: listen, engage, and activate. And I think that that'll help build out some really great programs and the baseline for success. So that's my humble thoughts.
Well, I want to thank you all for your insights and your intention. Hopefully our viewers really get a lot of value and some key nuggets to walk away, because this is a very important topic. And we're charting new courses as we move into this hybrid world. And I think that, if we just keep in mind about putting humanity and the individual at the center, I think there's going to be some great success as we move forward. So thank you all very much for your participation, and we'll get back to Culturati.
As you were watching that last conversation, some of you were asking, how do we actually measure the impact of these kinds of interventions on the things that business leaders care about? I would encourage you to make sure that you have a chance to see the interview with Arianna Huffington that we did at the beginning of Culturati today. If you missed that, we're going to be replaying that entire interview plus the Q&A that followed at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So you'll have a second chance to see Arianna and her connections that Thrive Global is making in the research that they're tapping between mental health interventions and mental health practices and bottom line indicators like retention and productivity. Also, you were asking what kind of apps or virtual environments support wellness. And I'd encourage you to check out the kinds of tools that are being offered by Spring Health and Aduro, because they're using research on what actually works to create virtual and online engagements to support practices and give people a sense of connection. Also, it's important to ask what can happen in these one-on-one meetings that actually make for good wellness practice. What kinds of things should we be helping our managers learn so that the one-on-ones become occasions for supporting wellness and mental health? I would point out one bit of recent research in the Journal of the American Medical Association Psychology that showed that people that were receiving regular check-ins and being asked open-ended questions where the callers were listening for clues as to what the person wanted to talk about made a measurable difference in people's experience of loneliness and anxiety. So if you're working with your managers, simply asking them, listen for things that your people may be trying to tell you, key words that they're saying in their statements that might be signals of stress or hopefulness or pressure. Just listening for clues gives people a sense that they actually aren't alone, which makes a difference in their mental health. Please keep engaging today's conversations. Hashtag Culturati 2021 on the mural board at the back of the virtual environment and also in the chat box in Culturati House. We're about to take a break, and this is your chance to connect with other people that are enjoying the conference today in the VIP networking lounge. You'll be able to get to it by going back to the door in the virtual environment. There's a sign posted beside it that you can click on and go into that lounge. And when you're there, you will see yourself as a picture in a circle, and you can use your mouse or the arrow keys to move around and find people to chat with. The closer you get to another circle, the easier it will be to hear that person and have a conversation online. You'll also find some other navigation tools that you can explore. And the first 25 people who enter the VIP Networking Lounge will get a copy of Arianna's book, Your Turn to Thrive. Also, you have the chance to go to the exhibition hall in the virtual world here and play some of the games that have been set up by our sponsors. You'll find a memory game, you'll find golf, you'll find a poll game, other things that have been offered as a way to connect with some of the Culturati sponsors. We're going to be back very shortly at 12:30 so that you'll have a chance to hear another set of conversations. And we're going to be coming back to look at how some other practitioners, real time, are engaging questions of inclusion and diversity and equity. So we hope you'll take this opportunity to meet some of your fellow Culturati participants in the VIP Networking Lounge and connect with our sponsors in the exhibition hall. We'll see you shortly. Welcome back. We hope you got a chance to check out our VIP Networking Lounge, to meet some of your fellow summit participants, and to investigate what's going on in the exhibition hall, where you can connect with Culturati sponsors. I'll be sharing with you Arianna Huffington's keynote interview again at 2 o'clock, along with the full Q&A that followed. And tonight and throughout the Culturati Summit, you'll be able to access all of the programming after it's happened live through our links at Culturati House. So no worries if you happen to miss something, you'll be able to come back asynchronously and tap into it. That gives you the chance to go into the conference rooms anytime that you want to be able to connect with others. We're going to keep our focus on mental health now as we transition to our next keynote speaker. Jen Porter is a Harvard MBA and one of Forbes 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs. She's going to be talking about research that she discusses in her latest book, Leading with Mental Health: Strategies for the Second Pandemic at Work. This is something that you all have told us is top of mind for you as business leaders, how we make sure that mental health becomes an opportunity for us to both make a welcoming, sustainable workplace, but also to make sure that our institutions are as productive as they can be in pursuit of their missions. So let's welcome to the stage our next keynote speaker, Jen Porter.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me at Culturati this year. It's a really delight to be here. My name is Jen Porter. I'm with the organization Mindshare Partners. Mindshare Partners is a nonprofit that's working on the culture of workplace mental health, trying to change that culture so that both employees and the organizations that they work for can thrive. We do that in a couple ways. One is workplace training and strategic advising directly with companies. So a lot of the examples and case studies that I'm going to talk about today come from that work. As a nonprofit, we also do other work in the space to push forward the movement of workplace mental health. So we host professional communities, for example, mental health ERGs, and groups like that. We also put out a bunch of research articles, resources, things like that into the world to push forward the movement of workplace mental health. So very excited to be here and to talk about that today. Several years ago, I spoke at the CHRO at a professional services firm. And when I brought up the topic of mental health at his company, he said something like, "Oh, that's not a problem here. No one's ever mentioned mental health to me, not really something that we need to address." What this leader didn't know is that in a regular year, 60% of people will experience symptoms of poor mental health at work. As leaders, you're the first people to understand that you can't fix a problem you can't see. If there's any sort of silver lining to the pandemic, it's that it's forcibly uncovered what really was already there. That mental health impacts every team, every conference call, every meeting, whether we decide to acknowledge it or not. If you're joining this session today, if you've been in a workplace for the last 12 months, I'm going to assume you already know that almost 80% of people say their mental health has been impacted by the pandemic. I'm going to assume you might know that there's a massive difference between the level of support the company leadership thinks they're offering in mental health and the level of support employees feel that they're actually getting. And I'm going to assume that you understand mental health is a diversity, equity, and inclusion issue. And that's been even more stark with the uprise in violence against Asian communities and the ongoing racial justice reckoning. So let's jump in to what we as leaders and managers can do about it. The good news is that workplace, and in particular leaders, are uniquely positioned to do something about the prevalence and the stigma of mental health. By do something about it, I don't mean eliminate it. Mental health is health. It's here to stay. Rather, our goals as leaders should be to support it, manage it, and ultimately become better because of it. Several years ago, I experienced a period of extreme burnout at work. It was a mix of being pregnant, having some significant setbacks in my workplace, left me feeling depressed, only partly functional. I didn't have the energy to do what I normally could. I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't engaged. However, at the time, it didn't even occur to me to tell anyone at work what I was experiencing. I was just trying to cover it up and be a strong leader and a strong professional in the workplace. But looking back, I really should have said something. My team, no doubt, was also struggling. It was a difficult time for everyone. And it would have been better to have a leader validate what people were experiencing rather than pretend that it somehow wasn't affecting me. It would have been better for the organization, the board, investors, peers who could have supported me in the organization better during that time. Now, on the other side of it, I can see what I lost by not talking about it. I can also see what I gained by going through it. For instance, I know how to recognize signs of burnout early on. I know what I can handle and what I can't. I'm more strategic about the projects that I pick, how I engage in them, and I'm certainly more empathetic to others. I know that for me, I want to work with people who have managed and overcome mental health challenges because they are better for it. They're strategic, self-aware, empathetic. They've learned to communicate clearly, advocate for themselves. These are the people and the leaders that you want on your team. But in order for us to unlock those outcomes and create that culture, mental health needs to be supported. So it's our job as leaders to create an environment that supports mental health and actually turns it into a strength. So let's start with what doesn't work. Hosting a one-time webinar. It's a logical solution to host a webinar. You know mental health is an issue. Great, let's put something on the calendar. But if this is the only thing that you said about mental health, it's probably going to backfire. People have trust issues when it comes to mental health. In fact, 8 in 10 workers say that they won't seek help for mental health because of fear or shame. Hosting a one-time conversation about mental health and then never talking about it again can actually decrease trust because someone said, okay, I can tell this really isn't a place that prioritizes mental health. Second, telling people to take care of yourselves. This is the #1 thing I've heard from leaders that they've said, from employees that they've heard, that they've been given permission somehow to take care of themselves. But you can't tell people to take care of themselves and not actually make any space for them to do it. People are working on average an extra 2 hours a day since the pandemic hit. Their home responsibilities have probably increased 2-fold or 3-fold. They need more than you telling them to take care of themselves in order to be able to do it. And finally, delegating full ownership of mental health to HR. Mental health is not a benefit. I can say that over and over. Mental health is not a benefit. It's a core responsibility of leadership. It's part of an organization's culture. Furthermore, research shows that people actually don't trust HR. If you're an HR person, you're doing a great job, and you're an important part of what mental health looks like at companies, but it can't be solely in the hands of HR. It can't be the only people talking about it. If you put mental health, which is a stigmatized topic, solely in the hands of an HR department, you won't get that traction you need to actually unlock the outcomes you can get by having a mentally healthy culture. So here's what will work. Sharing your story, being vulnerable, starting the conversation. actually changing the way that you work and building that into your culture. And doing all this as part of a broader mental health strategy. So this is where we're going to spend the rest of our time today, including some specific case examples of what this might look like in practice. Leading with vulnerability is one of the most powerful ways to normalize mental health at your company. Research backs this up. Storytelling works. I've seen storytelling work for an executive at a semiconductor company who talked about his depression in a regular department-wide meeting and encouraged people to seek help if they needed it. Afterward, he received several emails from people who could relate to his experience, who had a similar experience, and maybe had never said anything about it before. As a leader or a manager, you want to help people understand that they aren't alone, because they aren't. Mental health affects every meeting, every call, every team. If someone doesn't understand that, they're more likely to have the burden of trying to cover it up. They're less likely to seek support. You want people seeking support. I've seen storytelling work for the head of a department who had been open about his team, about his mental health experiences as a teen, but then also about the difficulty of raising a child who was having some mental health challenges as well. So when there was an employee that worked for him who was also having some mental health challenges in his family, they could, without fear, to find support, to find someone to speak with. As a leader, you want people to reach out for support when they need it. In fact, the average time for when somebody starts to feel symptoms of a mental health challenge or mental health condition and actually seek support for it is 8 to 10 years. 8 to 10 years. If you had a friend who had the flu for 8 years, you would kick them to the doctor. But for mental health, that's the average. As leaders and managers, we don't want people working for us who've had symptoms of something for 8 years. We want them to seek support and get help. So by storytelling, lowers the barriers to seeking support for mental health. You want to talk openly about mental health, even if you feel like you haven't had an experience that maybe you would define as mental health. I guarantee you've had. If you've had extreme stress, if you've ever experienced burnout, if you've been a caregiver of somebody who's experienced mental health challenges, or if you've just been a peer. These are all mental health stories. And if you lead with them, they can be a powerful change agent. So next I want to actually listen to a story by Lenny Mendoza. And as you're listening, think about the impact of his vulnerability for the people who worked for him. Gratitude to him for us being able to share his story. Also apologies since this is not read by him and actually a voice actor. But let's listen to his story.
Far too often, people suffer these mental health conditions with shame and without support. It has never been more urgent for business and economic leaders to move beyond platitudes on mental health. Leaders must ensure people can find vital care and acceptance for mental health challenges without punitive professional or personal impact. After I received a diagnosis of severe depression and anxiety against medical advice, I drove right back into coronavirus response. The crisis was all-consuming, and my local businesses and family also needed attention. At the time, I told myself and my team that we all have to operate at 120%. For me, this meant 80-hour work weeks and barely sleeping. I realize now that not only did I put my own health at risk, but also I was a bad role model for my team.
You could imagine that some of those phrases sounded familiar. All need to work at 120%. Not addressing your own needs. Gratitude to Mr. Mendoza for leading with that vulnerability. Another theme that he also made very clear in his story is how his personal choices about the way he worked may have affected other people on his team. So let's talk next about how changing the way that we work can be a powerful tool for mental health culture. First, a quote from Jennifer Moss. Picture a canary in a coal mine. They are healthy birds singing away as they make their way into the cave. But when they come out full of soot and disease, no longer singing, can you imagine us asking why the canaries made themselves sick? No, because the answer would be obvious. The coal mine is making the birds sick. Workplaces impact people's mental health. A traditional way of thinking would say that you can have work and you can have personal, and there could be a bright line between them. The pandemic has surely uncovered that that's not truly the case, especially when we're all videoing into work from our homes. But employees from the Millennial and Gen Z generations have been saying this for years. Workplaces impact people's mental health. In addition, an employee's immediate manager is the person who impacts their mental health the most. So as leaders, we need to make sure we're training and empowering managers to change the way that they work. And as managers, we need to take our team culture and practices into consideration. So take a look at this list of the research-based workplace factors that impact mental health. Job strain, effort, reward, and balance, working really hard and no one's ever acknowledging it. Mission-driven work, we feel really committed to the work that we're doing. Job insecurity certainly has been relevant for a lot of folks in the last 12 months. Discrimination, there's been a magnifying glass on this one recently, but it is not new either. Low decision latitude, high psychological demands, not to mention high psychological demands coming from all areas, caregiving, family, being at home, work. Prolonged uncertainty, double circle star on this one for the last 12 months, and low social support. What have you done as a leader or a manager to eliminate the negative effects of these constants? It's not individuals taking it upon themselves to take care of yourself that's going to make a difference. It's specific, deliberate strategies that you can empower your people with. We could probably talk about this one for the next 3 days. So let me just highlight a few that are particularly important. The first is to model mentally healthy behavior. Again, if you're telling people to take care of themselves and you're not actually doing it, they're going to intuit that successful people don't need to take time for mental health, which is not true. In fact, we know from research that folks in the C-suite experience mental health challenges at the exact same rate as employees throughout the organization. But actually, during the pandemic, mental health has been worse for people at leadership levels. So certainly, it's just as important for leadership to take care of their own mental health. A few examples, and these should feel familiar and obvious. Holding time for no meeting days or hours to actually get work done. Actually signing off, not answering emails at 4 a.m. or 10 p.m. Actually taking PTO. Marking mentally healthy activities on your calendar. Maybe this is exercise. Maybe it's, again, not being responsive during this time period. Maybe it's an activity of a child. Maybe it's marketing therapy on your calendar. This is, with permission, Ryan Benici, who's the Chief Marketing Officer, puts his therapy on his calendar. He writes, I've got 99 problems, but not making time to see my psychologist ain't one. So the people on his team not only know that mental health is a priority, but that it's okay to take care of it during the workday. The second piece is to question your practices. This is the hardest one, and honestly, the one that needs to happen the most. If the pandemic has uncovered flaws in our workplaces, this is certainly one of them. Workplaces are unsustainable. Again, people are working an extra 2 hours a day since the pandemic hit. For example, as a leader, can you always justify any urgency that you're creating? Is there a justification? Does it need to be done by a certain time? What's the urgency? What's the justification? Can you be clear about that? Are you questioning your practices, especially when it comes to client-facing work? The idea is not to take your culture or your work practices as given. Oh, we're this industry. Oh, we've always done it this way. Oh, people can handle it. Don't just tell people to take PTO. Adjust their work so they actually can take PTO. Don't just tell people to take care of themselves. Try shifting your development cycle back a couple of weeks. The CEO of Basecamp, as an example, when the pandemic hit, for those who had caregiving responsibilities, allowed them to set their hours, but not only set their hours, to set their hours even if that meant working fewer hours. And that's one of the biggest things. There's a lot of companies who've given people more flexibility on when they work, but they're working just the same or more. That's not actually shifting mental health as it could. The final one is talking about hard things. It's so easy in the corporate speak that we're all familiar with to talk about wellness and well-being. And those are great words. Also use the words mental health. Using the phrase mental health actually can make a difference in stigma in itself, which again, making a difference in stigma makes a difference in people feeling supported and not having to cover up what's going on with them and seeking support earlier, not waiting that 8 to 10 years. Also talking about the intersection of identity, race, equity, and mental health. Pinterest is a good example of this recently. So they have a couple of employee resource groups. One's the Blackboard group, one's the Pinside Out group, which is the mental health group. So at the beginning of Black History Month, the Blackboard ERG hosted a panel discussion specifically around mental health in the Black community. And then a few days later, the mental health ERG created a safe space to continue talking about those topics. Bringing it to the forefront, what's the intersection between mental health, identity, race, equity, and creating constant spaces for those conversations to happen. If you are uncomfortable about any of this, if you've said to yourself, eye roll, this is not going to work in my industry, or aren't I just coddling people if I do this, or aren't people going to take advantage of me? This is not how my company or my industry works. I imagine then you might have the belief that supporting mental health and enabling high performance are in opposition. So if you're supporting mental health, performance is going to go down, better to ignore it, keep it where it was. The reality is the opposite. Supporting mental health increases performance. People who are supported in their mental health are more engaged, they're more able to use their experience to their benefit. And workplaces who do this are more inclusive, have higher levels of belonging. So 80% of individuals who have a diagnosed mental health condition can live completely symptom-free with the right treatment. This is why you don't want people waiting 8 years to seek treatment, because treatment works. In addition, companies that invest in programs like awareness, training, stigma reduction, see a 5-to-1 or a 6-to-1 ROI. Supporting mental health enables performance. Now, neither of these, while we've talked about storytelling, workplace practices, can exist in a vacuum. So let's talk about what it means to be strategic about mental health. In our years of working with companies to create mentally healthy, high-performing cultures, here's what we found to be the recipe for success. First, equip leaders, managers, and employees with the right skills. Leaders need to understand what their role is. Managers need to know how to have one-on-one conversations to support employees in a way that balances compassion and compliance, know how to change the way that they work. Everyone needs to know that mental health is a thing, what stigma looks like, and how to find support for your own mental health. And beneath all that, there needs to be a solid foundation of expectations and daily practices that support mental health for teams. Second, systems need to support mental health. Your policies need to support mental health. For example, do people know that because mental health is health, sick days can be used for mental health? Do people know that they can take a therapy appointment during the day? Benefits also need to include mental health. And I said earlier, mental health is not a benefit. It's not. But benefits are part of mental health. If your only answer here is an EAP, it's not enough. Usage rates of EAP are abysmal. Mental health benefits need to meet people where they're at. With a stigmatized issue like mental health, there needs to be multiple levels where people can engage. Maybe it's clinical counseling, maybe it's coaching, maybe it's virtual visits or text coaching. Maybe it's just unallocated funds that folks can use to support their mental health. And finally, there needs to be accountability. Mental health goals need to be set and measured. Strategy, programs, practices around mental health also need to be inclusive of all communities and mental health experiences, because again, there's intersectionality between identity and mental health. And clear ownership of goals, including at the leadership level. Certainly, HR can play a really important role when it comes to mental health. It also needs to be owned by leadership because mental health is a culture issue. So let's look at a few specific examples of what this can look like. So in all these cases, the specific activities are not meant to be an exhaustive list of what each company is doing, but just highlighting a few things around their strategic approach that I think we can take things away from. So Morrison Forster is a law firm affectionately known as MoFo. They embarked with the goal to raise awareness around mental health, but also create a supportive environment around it. So the first thing that they did was set up a steering committee comprised of senior leaders that represented across their global offices. And this group was in charge of making the programming decisions, setting goals, moving it forward in the long term. This wasn't a 2-month project. This is ongoing strategic work around mental health. Then they embarked on a company-wide assessment to understand things like attitudes towards mental health, prevalence of mental health challenges. Do people actually understand the benefits that we have? Do they know where to go to find support? Things like that. From that, then you can build programs, support, communication, messaging to make it all work. So for example, MOFA implemented ongoing training to support specific groups of people. So people who managed other people, general audience, things like that. The next example is that of BlackRock. So similarly, taking a strategic approach. So on the measurement side, they actually began using pulse surveys to understand stressors and to understand what staff wanted around mental health. I'm sure you probably already do an engagement survey. You probably already do some pulse surveys. Are you talking about mental health? Are you asking about what stigma looks like? Are you asking about people's access to resources? Really important part if you want to measure progress towards your mental health goals. In the people and training space, they created remote skill building for managers. Managers training is one of the most important things you can do around mental health. Managers, we talked about earlier, are where the rubber meets the road. A person's experience at work is influenced most by the manager that they work for, and that's especially true when it comes to mental health. Managers most of the time don't have any clue how to do this. Do they know how to respond if someone approaches them with a question about mental health or discloses a mental health condition? Do they know how to talk about mental health in a way that respects privacy, but that also feels human and natural? Do they know what tools are available to them for problem solving? There's a lot to do for mental health culture, for managers knowing what to do on their teams. And then coming back to BlackRock on the policy side, they created enhanced health and well-being support for their employees and also increased work flexibility and time off. Again, increased work flexibility is a really powerful tool. But if you're not also changing the way that you work and giving people space to do that, it's not sufficient. Final example is that of Verizon Media. The CEO of Verizon Media has been an excellent external voice for mental health, but this is also translated internally. So there's strong executive communications around mental health being a priority. And this doesn't just come from the C-suite, it comes from department heads, from group leads, consistent messaging around mental health being a priority. On the grassroots level, there's a neurodiversity-based employee resource group that convenes people for support, for learning, and moves it forward in that way. They also trained executives and managers. And again, a lot of the skills between those two groups are similar, and that executives are probably managers as well. But executives also have a different role around culture setting and communication. And so making sure that there's space to explore that, set goals, to be intentional. And then finally, an example, there was a storytelling video campaign that actually came from employees, but around people with mental health stories, sharing that around, and then the CEO backing that up with more executive communication around the priority of mental health. Because of the stigma around mental health, it takes a lot of communication from a lot of different people for people to truly believe you that mental health is a priority. I mentioned a couple of times employee resource groups or other sort of employee-led initiatives. I want to be sure that we give a spotlight on those because they can be a really important part of this sort of holistic strategy. So when I say employee-led initiatives, I mean one of two things. So employee resource groups. So probably most of us are familiar with employee resource groups. They're often community or identity-based. They can also be mental health-based. Sometimes they're mental health explicitly. Sometimes maybe it lives within an ability-based employee resource group or within a neurodiversity-based one. They look like all different sorts of things. But the idea is that they create a space for peer support and also potentially a space for allyship and advocacy. Peer champion programs are similar. Usually those are structured as a smaller group of volunteers that are trained specifically in empathic listening and allyship and can promote that throughout the organization. So a couple of examples on the ERG side. Best Buy does a great job of addressing the intersectionality of mental health and identity in community. So every month they have an event that's confidential, people can come to, and it's related to events of the day. So it's Black History Month, it's Veterans Day, it's Women's History Month. They talk about the intersectionality of mental health and that issue. Folks have a chance to share stories about it, hear from others, ask questions, and go deeper into that topic in a safe space. J&J has a program called Mental Health Diplomats that actually started through grassroots storytelling. Again, storytelling works, and has grown to have really strong executive support and really become a force in the company for mental health culture change. On the peer champion programs, there's lots of companies doing this. I'm just pulling out some examples, but Genentech has a mental health champions program that's focused on being allies and advocacy. So people can, whatever their role is, be an advocate for mental health, and then as they're hearing things, they can also raise that up. So for the people that are in charge of mental health, or the people that are moving strategy forward, they're getting a voice from employees, from people on the grassroots level. Google has a program called Blue Dot, which was also started by a group of employees, and that's purely around peer listening. It's purely around people having someone that they can go to, or many people that they can go to, for listening ear, to vent, to talk about hard things that doesn't feel as official. Earlier, I talked about when you think about your mental health benefits, meeting people where they're at. Peer champion programs are a great way to do that. People have a lot of hesitancy about going somewhere that seems formal or official to get support. And creating a peer program is a great way to meet people where they're at. And then certainly that can play a role in referring people up the ladder, for the support that makes most sense to them. So while these groups play a vital role in creating mentally healthy culture, they can't be the only thing. If the only thing your company is doing is mental health ERG, first of all, great work, awesome. But also it has to be part of a bigger strategy, and it has to have sufficient support. So Mindshare Partners has a free community of mental health ERGs with 200 companies in it who have a mental health ERG, who are trying to start a mental health ERG. And we did a survey to see what kind of budgets people were given. The median amount was $0. And often ERGs are the main place or the first place employees go for mental health support. They need resources. I would challenge any company who has a mental health ERG, give that group $25,000 and see what they can do with it. It will be the best money that you spend. Groups also need senior leadership involved in advocating for them. Because mental health is stigmatized, their legal teams sometimes push back. Can't talk about mental health at work. This opens us up for liability. Leaders can push back and make sure that ERGs, the peer champion programs, are given the green lights and the permission they need to push these programs through. And the leaders of these groups finally need acknowledgement. Maybe that's extra pay. Maybe that's reduced responsibilities in their day job. Maybe it's at least acknowledgement, but supporting people who are leading those efforts. So as a recap, we need to do 3 things to unlock the potential of a mentally healthy culture. No more one-time mental health webinars. Rather, start the conversation by sharing your story, being vulnerable, and talking about mental health by using the words mental health over and over and over. We need to back up our verbal permission of taking care of ourselves and actually change the way that we work and build that in throughout our system so that managers are also giving that permission to their teams. And finally, instead of just delegating the whole thing to HR, make it a leadership priority. Make it part of a broader mental health strategy that has ownership throughout the organization. Before I close out, I want to mention just a few free resources to go to if you want to start. So the mental health ERG community that I mentioned, it's free. If you have a mental health ERG or you want to start one, please check that out. Also, a few things I mentioned today. So the strategy framework, which was up for not that many seconds, is available for download for free on our website, as well as the measurement questions. So if you want to think about incorporating mental health questions into your pulse surveys, into your engagement surveys, start there for the 5 questions that we most recommend. With that, thank you for your time. Culturati community, a pleasure to be here, and hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference.
In the first year of the Culturati Summit, we talked about culture as what we talk about at work, as well as who's included in that conversation. And when it comes to mental health, it's very clear that talking about it makes a difference, and including everyone in the conversation is an important part of keeping an organization healthy. We're going to be making a pivot now to talking about the way in which we have more inclusivity in the broader ecosystems of which our organizations are part. A lot of the discussion of diversity, equity, and inclusion is framed as if it's a problem within our organizations, for our organizations to solve. But some entrepreneurs actually see it as an opportunity for them to connect with underserved markets and to not only do good for others, but also to create good businesses. And for anyone who's frustrated by the slow pace at which large organizations are actually becoming more inclusive, there's always the opportunity that an entrepreneurial move to reach out to an underserved market actually creates the business opportunity you've been looking for. So we're about to hear from Morgan DeBaun, who is the CEO of Blavity, as well as Emily Ramshaw of the 19th News, in a conversation about identifying underserved markets and connecting with them as a business opportunity. Maybe we can learn something from them to apply to our larger organizations, or maybe they're pointing at opportunities that we're looking for.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Ramshaw. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the 19th, and I'm thrilled to be at the Culturati Summit, and in particular to get to conduct this interview with Morgan DeBaun. Morgan, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to read a quick bio for Morgan so we make sure we're all on the same page with her incredible resume. Morgan is the founder and CEO of Blavity, Inc., the leading media company for Black culture and millennials. Since Blavity's launch in 2014, Morgan has led the company to successfully acquire Travel Noir, a travel platform for Black millennials, and Shadow and Act, a Black entertainment news site. Under Morgan's leadership, Blavity has launched several leading consumer summits, including Summit 21 for Black women creators and Bay Area's Afrotech, which is the largest tech conference for Black innovators and founders. Hopefully we will all be back together for all of these events really soon. As of today, Blavity Inc. has raised $12 million from top Silicon Valley venture firms, which is amazing. Congratulations. Morgan's also a passionate small business advocate and advises early stage entrepreneurs on how to scale their business in her signature Work Smart advising program. Finally, she is the founder of M Rose Essentials, a natural skincare and essentials line, and Growth Notebook, which produces productivity and mindset planners. So very well-rounded, incredible entrepreneur. Welcome, Morgan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. You know, I can't just do one thing.
I know. And especially in this moment in history, trying to do all of these things is really incredible. So, well, Morgan, I want to start by asking you, so many countries right now, so many companies right now across the globe, across the country are talking about DEI, are talking about belonging as sort of the salve needed to improve their businesses, to better serve their audiences and markets, and maybe most important, to enhance their corporate culture. And I just want to ask, for you, this was all the basis on which you actually started a business, which was brilliant. You were way ahead of the curve. So can you talk a little bit about your decision to launch Blavity and the sort of need you saw in the market through that lens?
Yeah, so I started the company. I was a young CEO, so I was 24 when I started. I was working in tech. A little bit about me, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, so Midwest through and through, and made this giant leap to go to Silicon Valley, which at the time was like not the trendy thing to do, and especially not in Missouri. And so I moved to the Bay Area, and I loved the culture of innovation and creativity and the spirit of entrepreneurship that was just so omnipresent everywhere in the Bay. And I was still feeling like, wait, hold on, there's something missing. You all aren't creating products for me. We Black people are never the target audience. When you're learning about how products are built, what you realize in the Bay is that it's just a group of people, typically men, sitting in a room and they're looking at data and they're coding and they're looking at how things are working, but they are looking at a data set that doesn't actually reflect an American culture or population. And so to me, that was just kind of like an aha moment where it inspired me to build a company where we are the first person, the first target user. When we're doing research studies, when we're looking at our data, we're looking at it from the Black millennial perspective as an audience and as a consumer, and thinking about how can we super serve this demographic and go really deep and make sure that no matter where they're going, they can have the content, the experience, the network to be able to live their best life and be happy and feel like they are understood by a brand and by a company, or by just a piece of content that they're looking at on social media.
I mean, it seems so obvious in retrospect. Like, of course, there was a huge audience, an engaged audience. Did it feel obvious to you in the moment that there was this huge, void that was missing in the market? I mean, when you were trying to make the case for Blavity, in those sort of early days in Silicon Valley, as you're working it into it and doing different things, did you in the back of your head have this sort of nagging feeling like there's a huge market here? Why hasn't anyone tapped it yet?
Yeah, I definitely had some things that I had to work through. So, one, there are Black media companies, legacy Black media companies that have been around for 50 years plus, and they're incredible. You have Essence, Ebony, Jet, and yet BET, a lot of them weren't covering news. They were entertainment brands, or more culture and pop culture, which is fantastic. But the younger generation, my generation, and now even younger, we really care about the issues. We really care about what's happening in the conversations around culture and driving the culture forward. And there wasn't a brand or in the Black space that was kind of evolving towards that and being of service for that and that platform for a dialogue. And so that was one of the second parts is, how is this possible that this doesn't exist? You have that moment like, wait, I can't possibly be the only person who's thought of this, right? And as entrepreneurs, I mean, by nature, we are the people who think of things that other people haven't thought of, or we're the crazy ones who decide to actually do something about it, right? So I did have some moments of, okay, and then is it me? Am I the one to fix this problem? And yeah, why not me? Like, why not me, right? And so, yeah, that was probably within the first 6 to 9 months of creating the business and starting to formalize, like, what's the name and introduce myself as, oh, I'm starting this business. And that's when the identity started to sink in that I'm really about to go and be a full-time entrepreneur.
Well, I'm 6 years behind you in this journey, and I'm like soaking up every word here. I need all of this positive energy. I mean, in many ways, we owe Blavity to the fact that after college, you headed out to Silicon Valley. As you said, you worked in corporate America, you worked at Intuit, you looked around you, and you saw next to no one who looked like you. I am a white woman who has never had that experience. I cannot even begin to imagine what that experience was like culturally. How much did that contribute to your decision to take the leap?
Oh, it was a huge part of it. Being in a work environment where I was one of very few, where I could walk an entire day on campus of thousands of people and not see anyone that was Black at all. It does wear on you, and it weared on me, and I think part of it was I can predict the future. I can see myself still being at this company or at a big tech company in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now. And I felt like I don't like this version of my life on a day-to-day basis. This isn't the legacy that I want to have. And so no better time than now to make a decision and redirect that vision of what my future could have looked like. So it is something that I think a lot of women of color and Black people in tech and in a variety of industries. I mean, not even just technology, in the medical field, in the media field, and journalism. It is something that we all have to work on.
Yeah, amazing. Well, speaking of media, you left your job at Intuit right around the time that Michael Brown was killed by police in Ferguson. And you've said that you noticed something that felt stunning to you, that there were just sort of so few Black reporters covering this story, no Black media. I think I heard you quoted that like the first story by Black media you didn't see until Monday, and he was killed on a Friday or a Saturday or something like that. It was all these white reporters sort of parachuting into this community and telling the story through their lens. How big of a motivating factor, were you well on the way to Blavity at that point, or was that a sort of a turning point for you?
So my ground happened in August of 2014. I had launched a version of the product with my co-founders over the summer in July. So it was very back to back. When we started the business, it wasn't necessarily to change the world, I'll be honest. I mean, it was definitely like, we're going to do a business and we're going to make content and community and platforms for Black people. We know who we want to serve. We're not positive on what the product's going to look like. We're not positive on which solution is going to be sticky. And I, unlike I think other entrepreneurs, really try not to care too much about the solution. I care about the person, and that gave me the flexibility to pivot whenever I needed to based off of the data that I was seeing. And so when my ground happened, that was because I was so close to it, being from St. Louis, but I was still in San Francisco, living in San Francisco, working my day job. I could see and feel the gap. I could feel like, this is not enough. Like, this is not good enough. We need something else that can fill this gap, that can be a place of information, that can be of service to the people on the ground who are trying to get information out to everyone else on where do you donate, who's in jail, how do we get them out? Like, there was just so much happening so quickly in the Black community. We didn't have a clearinghouse of truth that was from our perspective. And it just felt like something that I could make a difference with.
Did you always think that Blavity would be a for-profit? Was there ever a moment where you toyed with the idea of launching a nonprofit, a C3?
Blavity absolutely needed to be for-profit. And so many reasons. I believe in economic advancement, and closing the wealth gap is around entrepreneurship and ownership. And it has to be because we, as a Black community, I think the fastest way is going to be the Black community lifting ourselves up. We're only going to convince so many people to care about us. And obviously it hasn't gone so well. So I think that for our community, we must be the ones who we are waiting for. We are the ones, and entrepreneurship, it is the fastest way to wealth generation. Technology and being a participant in the tech industry. That's why I created Afrotech, so that we weren't left behind on another huge wealth creation moment. We were in the game, and we are still lots of work to do, but I do believe Afrotech has accelerated the Black folks that are in the technology industry. And so, yeah, I mean, it's so many things, so many reasons why Blavity Inc. needed to be for profit. And I will tell you, I haven't talked about this much, I actually just launched Blavity.org. So we are officially now starting the nonprofit. I'm so excited. I'm so proud of it. And the first program launches this spring.
Amazing. Well, I'm so glad that I asked that question then. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what it was like to launch and raise funding for Blavity when you were first getting it off the ground in 2014. I mean, obviously we know how little VC money goes toward women, and in particular goes toward women of color. I know you poured something like $250,000 of your own money into this over time. I heard a great story about how your dad told you to keep working at the same time so that there was some money coming in.
Yes.
And then you only pitched to Black VCs at the beginning. Talk about your efforts to get this stood up, the challenges there, what that was like.
Yeah, I was a first-time founder. I am a first-time founder, right? And as first-time founders, as a first-time founder, you don't know what you don't know, right? Like, it was very much a steep learning curve for everything, fundraising, the vocabulary, the legal, the hiring, every single part of running a company, I had to learn on my own for the most part. And a lot of it was through trial and error. And so when I went out to fundraise, I did what I felt like was the obvious choice, which is I needed to convince somebody to give me money, right? That's the goal of fundraising. You're convincing people who have money to give it to you because you have a good business and you think you can return it with a certain return. So first, I needed to convince someone that there was a problem worth solving. And then 2, I needed to convince them that there was a business here. And then 3, that it could be big enough that I could give them their money back, right? And so I went with the first thing, which is, do people think there's a business here? Is there a problem that needs to be solved? So I went to Black folks who were in venture capital and said, I know there's a problem to be solved. You must, right? You're Black, I'm Black. This seems so obvious. And they did agree there was maybe a problem to be solved, but they didn't necessarily agree it was a big business, nor did they necessarily have the economics on the fund side to be able to take the risk of us at that time. And so they all said no. Now, I didn't understand the dynamics between VCs and founders. I didn't understand necessarily the returns that were required for certain fund sizes. And so in hindsight, I went after the wrong, it was never going to work with that strategy. But in the moment, oh man, I felt like I was run over by a truck. My own people said no. And that feeling will never leave me. And I hold on to that because I am now in a position with our brands, with our company, with publishing, being that first to publish. Like when someone pitches their story to our company, their small business that, just got launched, or they just had a huge milestone, or the filmmaker who just poured all their last dollar into making this beautiful short for Shadow and Act. Like, I'm like, God, we have to say yes. Like, if not us, then who? Right. So it's been a motivating thing for me. And going back to fundraising. So I was, crying myself to sleep. And then I got back up and I said, okay. Actually, my friends persuaded me. They said, like, Morgan, you really need to raise, because we were getting big and it was expensive and I couldn't afford it anymore. I needed to start paying my employees. And so I went out and raised from social impact investors, because people who care, who understand the problem, who have different financial incentives, who are willing to take the risk, because us existing pushes the culture forward, and maybe we win, and they're happy, right? And it's something that they can believe could work, because that's part of why they started as investors in the first place, is that they believe that people can build for-profit companies and do good and make a positive impact through a business. So that was really transformational for me in terms of just understanding the power dynamics in the venture capital industry, understanding all the parties involved, what everyone's solving for. And since that round, we were oversubscribed, and people constantly are trying to give us money. I'm like, we are not raising, and I feel grateful for that. But it is that first 6 months, oh man, no good.
Well, as someone, I did this on the nonprofit side, and I can counter. I know how terrifying that was in the early days, for sure. So, I mean, when you got that first, I think New Media Ventures is a big funder of you all, and they're amazing. So that's incredible. When the money started coming in, when you got the check, it was obviously so clear that this was needed, and it really took off. At the same time, you were and are operating in a media sphere, and even a new media sphere where Black women are woefully underrepresented at the highest levels. What has it been like for you, making such a huge name for yourself in this arena? Do you feel like you have strong peers? Do you feel like there is still a dearth of strong Black women at the helm of news organizations? Obviously, this is a moment in history where a lot of news organizations are talking about or grappling with their own racial reckonings, long overdue.
It's such a great question. From a media perspective, there are not that many women on the business side of Black women, certainly on the business side of media and making these big decisions. Blavity is still only 6 years old. So we are just very early in our media news journey in comparison to many of our peers who have been in the game for 40, 50, 60 plus years. So I think that, to me, I'm really focused on serving our audience through content and through brand. And now, as the company has matured and built into profitability, where we can have some more flexibility around how we're spending our cash, we're working on building our brands across multiple channels of distribution. And so what does it look like for us to be in audio? What does it look like for us to be in streaming and OTT? What does it look like for us to finally say yes to Snapchat to get that channel, or TikTok, where I was so reluctant before because I didn't want to risk making a misstep. I operated out of fear of making a mistake and then having to go bankrupt, right? Because when you're a startup, you don't have much cushion. And I share that because I think, for those entrepreneurs who are watching this, there is always this fear of, if I make a mistake, I don't have a safety net. right? And I think in the news world and for media, it's a very expensive business because content, when you're doing it right, is expensive. And so I think we're just getting started in terms of really being able to cover the true stories of our community and be of service and work in partnership with some of the best storytellers of our generation. I think we're just getting started, really.
I feel you wholeheartedly on the sort of not stepping outside your comfort zone too soon. Everything is expensive, and particularly when you think about video and audio, it's like a whole lot. You have now built many successful businesses. It's not just Blavity, Afrotech, Travel Noir, as we said, 2190, Emrose Essentials, Growth Notebook. All of them are targeting different segments of Black America and beyond. Can you talk about your decision to corner, a truly sort of identity-based market and why it has worked so well?
Yeah, it's a question that I think is really important because early on, people were like, well, why don't you make a Hispanic version of Blavity? Like, if you've been successful over here, why don't you make it, go to other demographics? And I'm like, we are not successful yet. Like, we still have so much to do to cover the Black experience in this country and around the world. I mean, I could very easily think about Blavity in the UK.
Totally.
Right?
Like, in this moment, my God, yeah.
Blavity in Europe. Like, there are Black expats, there are people who have a diaspora experience. Blavity in Brazil, a huge Afro experience in Brazil. Blavity in Nigeria. Like, I don't need to go outside of the Black experience because we are a huge population in this world, and we're barely even scratching the surface when it comes to even America. So it's something that I think we as Americans have such a narrow perspective on the world, and even we just think about our own little universe, even within the United States. And when you come from a global perspective, or you consider the total audience of something that may appear to be niche, but actually is like really not, right? Now I get it, because I've done this conversation with investors where they say, well, there's X amount of people in America, and there's X% of them are millennial, and X% of the millennials are Black, and so your total market just out the gate is, XYZ. And I'm like, really? Who do you listen to in music? What sports do you watch? Who are your favorite athletes? Like, no. Black culture is also part of American culture. So from whichever way you look at it, Black audience is actually a very, very, very smart choice.
That's amazing. It's brilliant. I mean, honestly, I've had those conversations with investors about women, and they're 51% of the American electorate. It's like,
right?
No, this is not a niche, right?
It's not a niche. Yeah. I mean, it is in relation to the majority. I understand that, but the majority is shrinking.
Exactly. Every single day. So
every day.
I want to pivot a little bit and talk about what the last year has been like for you professionally. I mean, when you talk about those like sort of early days of, being in tears, trying to figure out if you're going to be able to make this work. Obviously, this has been an exceedingly difficult year for women of color in particular. And I think, obviously women entrepreneurs have struggled as well. From the sort of national reckoning on race over the summer to the pandemic that has created big difficulties for advertising revenue, and I speak from personal experience in that regard. Can you just talk about what the challenges have been like in the last year of your life?
So many learning opportunities for me and growth moments. I'm certainly a way better leader than I ever been in my entire life. I'll start with the personal first. I mean, I think for me, as someone who was always on the road, doing public speaking engagements, meeting our audience, our community, traveling, doing happy hours, and just making sure that I and the company are available and accessible. It was a bit of a transition for me to be at home. And I'm single, I don't have dog, so it was just like a lot of, I'm always around people and all of a sudden I'm around no one. for weeks, for months. And so it gave me some time to really think about who I wanted to be and who I had become through momentum and all the pressures of what people had expected of me and how I responded to those pressures. As a Black woman who is one of very few raised venture funding, there's a lot of responsibility that I am grateful for, but take on in terms of being of service. And just that also on top of actually just trying to run a business that wins it was a lot of pressure. So I'm grateful for the time to focus on myself and to understand and figure out who I wanted to be and how I was going to operate in the world. And even some healing, like even forgiving myself for mistakes that were inevitable along the way. And so that was really nice, to have that solitude in my adult life. Now, at the business level, Blavity has two core businesses. We have Afrotech, which is a huge driver of profitability for the business. It's a fantastic conference experience. It's a monopoly in its field, and we're in person. Right. So we had to quickly make a decision to cancel the conference and build a digital experience that still made people feel something and get back to that connectivity and ultimately accomplish its goal, which is to get people jobs or have people stay in tech and the jobs that they have or develop skills as they're learning and navigating their careers. So we built this whole avatar experience where you could go, you could sign in, you could dance, you could walk around and walk in and out of conference rooms. We built a live streaming platform so that people could go, if they didn't want to do the whole avatar hangout thing, they could just watch the content on their web browser. So we built a lot of things very quickly and kind of went into war zone to make sure that we could still be of service in a time in which people really wanted to connect. That was tough because I was asking my team to also operate at 110% in the middle of the pandemic. And then also because of the social unrest on the media side of the business, which is the second half, our second division, my team was tired. And covering death is a burden I don't think many people understand. Like the news team has been covering Black death for 6 years. And so we lose people, not because they don't like working here or they don't want to be a Black journalist, because it's just like, it is exhausting to get DMs and emails from mothers and wives and sisters and friends who are saying so-and-so got shot and you're the only publication that could cover it. And we have to look into that stuff. We are supposed to, that is our mission, right? And so I was very conscious of, we're in a pandemic, we now have a responsibility. How do I lead through this? And our revenue paused. We are a business. We are not a not-for-profit. So that was very, it tested me a lot. And so how I managed it was through our strong leaders. I mean, I have an incredible team of directors and VPs at our company who really made a commitment to each other and to the company to get us through this. And we went into overdrive, and we all aligned on the principles of decision making, on how we were going to make decisions so that everyone could operate marching towards the same end goal. And some things that I did, I started meeting with our associate level every 2 weeks. I started meeting with our managers every 2 weeks. We did a lot of town halls that were just healing. People shared poems, people shared songs. There was one conference call that I just couldn't even speak. I was just crying the whole time, and my co-founders had to kick off the meeting because it's just overwhelming to be in a group of people that care so much and also are responsible for so much. And we're mostly people of color, So yeah, last year was really tough. Last year was really tough for the business, but I'm proud that we came out stronger than ever, profitable, and able to give a lot of money back to our employees. We gave everybody vacations and self-care bonuses. And once we made it through, it was like, we did it, Joe. We did it, So I went to Costa Rica for 30 days. I was like, I'm on vacation. It was very important to me that we walked into this year feeling like we made it, feeling like we made it, and I had time to heal. I've had time to kind of pick up the pieces in my personal life or whatever that may be with myself, and move forward with our goals, move forward with the company. And so it's been an incredible quarter to date.
Well, that's unbelievable. And I mean, all of us grappling with this moment in history, that takes extraordinary leadership. And the fact that you've been able to be there and be such a supportive and empathetic lead for your team, and also able to sort of pivot, that's like the ultimate in entrepreneurship, is to learn all this new technology, learn how to stream all these things, like suddenly make the in-person experience virtual. That is exhausting. I'm curious, as we sort of begin to see the light with this pandemic, with the president saying things may be, more or less back to normal by the 4th of July, what do you miss from your previous life from the standpoint of your professional life? And are there lessons that you will take into the future? Are there ways that the business is forever changed? Are there ways that sort of work-life balance is forever changed?
Mm-hmm. I think that I do miss conferences. I say that hesitantly because as someone who was always on the road speaking at conferences, it's a catch-22. But what I love about being an entrepreneur and building a business is just the people you meet along the way. And so to not have that spontaneous connection, those high impact moments where you can meet 50 to 100 people, 500 people, was definitely tough. I think some of us have found that experience on Clubhouse. Some of us have found that experiences in smaller group gatherings on Zoom, and that's been beautiful. But I don't think anything replaces the in-person connections that can happen when you're just standing in line, So I look forward to that. And in terms of how the business has changed, I think we've learned we can do a lot less with more. I mean, a lot more with less. Exactly. I definitely think we can do a lot more with less. We used to think we had to have 10 people in a production to pull it off. Well, now we have 3 and 2 people joining remotely. We have learned a lot about operating and communication. Our written communication at this company is incredible now. You can't get away with just a quick email. No, it needs to be concise. There's no casual conversations that are happening. We've made the decision to be fully remote. So we're not having the office anymore. People have moved all over the world. I have folks who are in different countries who are working and operating at the best they ever have. And so I look forward to also, from a culture point of view, us learning how to be a strong community together virtually. So thinking about retreats, thinking about team building meetings where we fly people into different cities. There's definitely some work that we're going to need to do to keep that connectivity and that team really strong. I do think it's going to be a much better experience, though, for people of color and for women, because we've through my employees and even my own experience, I know how much more we take care of others. And having to go into an office and the physical, leaving of space, and even the commuting is restrictive for some people. And this has given a lot of folks, I think, the freedom to be able to handle their work how they want to handle their work.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I was on the road 3 days a week before the pandemic, and I have a 5-year-old, and I have not been away from her for a single bedtime in more than a year. And it's just, when you think about what you can do and how much of that travel was unnecessary, I'm with you. I miss so much of the in-person, but there are also aspects of our lives that I do think this is really good for equity, and particularly for.
Yeah, and I think it's going to get better when people can have their kids go to daycare and they're not doing 2-3 jobs right at home. So it's it was really painful to get to this level of freedom. For many people, I have so many friends with kids, and I'm just I don't know how you do it. It's just incredible. But now I'm yes, send them to school, okay? But you stay home and just imagine the new productivity that women are going to be able to have. And men, now that they know how much work it takes.
The point of that's definitely part of this equation too. So, all right, well, we're about to be out of time. So I've got one more question for you here. And that is that, lots of companies talk the talk, but don't walk the walk when it comes to DEI, when it comes to DEI and belonging. what is the secret to building truly inclusive workplaces in your mind, to ensuring people don't just have the seat at the table, but feel like they are meant to be there?
You know, I advise a lot of CEOs of Fortune 100 companies through our work with Afrotech. We've been gotten very close with leadership teams who genuinely are trying to do better and genuinely are struggling with it, even though they are doing their best. And I believe that. And I've seen companies who are doing well, right? Like who made a decision and have been able to be successful. And I think the difference, to be honest with you, and this is not something that I think a lot of people want to challenge, but the ones that have done really well in actually making a difference, not just caring and talking about making a difference, is when the white man at the top makes it his priority. And it's just like, it's annoying, you know, but that's when I see the difference happens much faster, because he says, we have 10 seats at the table, at the board level, at the VP level, at the SVP level, at the director level, whatever level is the high level. We have 10 seats. Now I can do one of two things. If we're going to have more diversity on this board, you have one or two things. Someone needs to get off the board to make room for someone else, which is typically means a white man needs to get off the board to make room for someone else, or we need to add more chairs to the table. Those are your only two options. It's just that simple. And so I think previously people felt like a lot of people were holding on to their power because they actually didn't even really consider that, just add more chairs. And so they felt like, well, the only option is for me to retire and I'm not done yet and I worked so hard to get here and I'm a man, and right? So I think that more people should consider adding more chairs to the table and not viewing even if you are going to give up a seat, not viewing that as a sign of defeat or that people are taking your spot or anything. That like succession planning is a sign of strength. Building a diverse team that lives beyond you is a sign of strength and sign of true leadership. And if we can reframe the conversation and really work with our white men, like, you know, that's going to be something that will accelerate the conversation faster in the existing institutions. Now, the other thing that's happening is that the existing institutions are being disrupted. So the other way to do it is to say, we don't care about your table. Like, I'm not even going to try to fight the fight with you. You're all going to retire soon. Like, go away. You know, my business is going to crush your business, right? Our company is going to crush your company, and our company is going to start off diverse. Our company is going to start off doing it right. So I'm really encouraged by the newer companies that are IPOing, the Bumbles, the Peloton. Like, there are companies that are new, that are disrupting, and they're going to be our generation's Fortune 100. And so let's focus on those CEOs. Like, let's focus on those companies. So I love working with those companies because let's just not have the problem. Let's just build it into your business, right?
Amazing. Morgan, you're fantastic. Thank you so much for setting the bar so high. And thank you so much for joining us for this program. It's really been fantastic to be with you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Emily. That's our final keynote for this first day of the Culturati Summit. But if you want to see more, Culturati House is open 24/7. Right now, we're going to replay the opening keynote interview with Arianna Huffington and the Q&A that follows. So stand by if you'd like to see that right now. And tomorrow, we're going to have an equally interesting lineup of people that are going to continue the conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, mental health, and how we empower our managers. We're going to have Tristan Walker, who is someone who has successfully navigated both Sand Hill Road and corporate America, who's going to build on some of the ideas that Morgan DeBaun just shared with us as he is now pursuing the expansion of inclusion at the level of some of the biggest companies in America, in particular Procter & Gamble. In addition, we're going to hear from our dear friend, Mark McClain, who is the CEO of SailPoint, who is going to be talking about his company, and he's got perhaps the highest rating of any CEO on Glassdoor. We'll also be hearing from Culturati favorite Dr. Jeremy Hunter, as well as Aubrey Blanche, who will be talking about belonging. But she's also a data scientist. what kind of information helps make culture conversations compelling to the CFO in your organization. So all that is coming up. If you'd like to read Arianna Huffington's book, Your Turn to Thrive, you can find it in the Culturati bookstore. Be sure to visit our exhibition hall so that you can connect with Culturati sponsors and play the games that they have designed for this year's summit. And of course, you can continue the conversation with your fellow seminar summit participants in the Culturati virtual chats, the VIP networking lounges. We're really glad that you're with us today. Stand by for Arianna Huffington, and we will see you again in this room tomorrow.